Welcome back. Deep within the national forests and wilderness areas, there are park rangers guarding secrets far darker than you could imagine. Stories you will not hear anywhere else. If you crave fear, mystery, and bone-chilling truths that will haunt your sleep, you're in the right place. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel if you're brave enough to hear what lurks behind the trees. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you safe right now? Get ready. The next story will change how you see nature forever. Which forest scares you the most? Drop your answer in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales from the darkness. Mr. Bellicho. The forest was deathly still as I set out on patrol that crisp autumn morning. Golden aspen leaves crunched beneath my boots, the only sound disturbing the heavy silence that hung over the remote Alaskan wilderness. As a park ranger, I was accustomed to the solitude out here, miles from any sign of civilization, but something about the atmosphere today felt different, unsettling. I had awoken before dawn, a sense of restless anticipation preventing me from falling back asleep. Unable to shake the strange feeling, I'd decided to start my rounds early, strapping on my pack and heading into the dense foliage as the first rays of sunlight slanted through the trees. My unease only grew as I hiked deeper into the backcountry. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision. A squirrel skittered up a nearby trunk and I flinched, hand reflexively going for my sidearm. Get a grip, I told myself sternly. You're jumping at shadows. Still, I couldn't dispel the creeping sensation that I was being watched. I paused and scanned the undergrowth, searching for any sign I was not alone. But all was motionless. Not even a breath of wind rustled the turning leaves. An oppressive hush had fallen over the forest, as if it collectively held its breath. Unnerved, I picked up my pace, boots pounding a steady rhythm on the hard-packed earth. Better to keep moving and finish my patrol as quickly as possible. The sooner I was back in the familiar surroundings of the ranger station, the better. I had duties to attend to there, and a pile of overdue incident reports to file. The strange mood of the woods was likely just a product of an overactive imagination, the result of too many campfire tales shared over late-night beers. At least that's what I told myself as the prickling feeling of being surveilled intensified with each step I took. Rounding a bend in the trail, I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whirled around, pulse spiking, but there was nothing there. Just serried ranks of aspens and pines stretching endlessly in all directions. The quiet was absolute, like a physical pressure against my eardrums. Cursing under my breath, I continued on, trying to ignore the growing tightness in my chest. I was being ridiculous. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. There was nothing out here, just the usual assortment of bears, moose, and wolves. I'd encountered them all before without incident. Whatever dangers the Alaskan backcountry harbored, I could handle it. And yet, as I trekked on, I couldn't escape the uncanny sense that this was just the starting point of a journey into something far more sinister. A shiver crept down my spine that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. Unconsciously, my fingers tightened their grip on my rifle. Silently, I prayed my rising dread was unfounded, but deep inside, I knew with grim certainty it was not. The sun inched higher into a cloudless azure sky as morning wore on into afternoon. Normally, I would take the time to admire the stunning hues of the changing leaves at this time of year, when the Alaskan wilderness blazed with vibrant crimsons and golds. But today, the beauty of the autumnal display was lost on me, my attention fixated instead on the rough trail underfoot. Not for the first time, I wished I'd brought one of the sled dogs with me for company. Their keen senses and alert presence always made me feel more at ease out in the bush alone. But they'd seemed oddly unsettled this morning too, whining and pacing restlessly in their kennels. At the time, I'd dismissed it as a reaction to my own nervous energy. Now I wasn't so sure. I crested a small rise, breathing hard from the steep climb, and paused to get my bearings. The winding trail had led me into a heavily wooded valley, the dense foliage allowing only occasional glimpses of the snow-capped peaks beyond. It was then that I saw them. A set of unusual animal tracks crossing perpendicular to my path. Frowning, I moved closer to investigate, the fine hairs on the back of my neck standing to attention. At first glance, the oblong impressions resembled wolf prints, but they were far too large. Each was nearly the length of my boot. And wolves traveled in packs. These tracks indicated a solitary creature. A lone bear, perhaps? They sometimes roamed far from their usual ranges in search of food before winter hibernation. But something about the tracks made me uneasy. The gait was strange, almost human-like in its stride. And were those claw marks at the tips? What kind of animal made prints like these? Unholstering my rifle, I scanned the tree line warily. The uncanny sensation of being watched had returned full force, along with a primordial wariness that set my teeth on edge. I imagined slitted eyes peering out from behind gnarled trunks, the patting of paws just out of sight. This was one mystery I had no desire to solve. Suddenly, the sharp snap of a branch off to my left made me whirl around, heart hammering against my ribcage. A dark silhouette detached itself from the shadows between the pines and stepped into the open. My finger tightened on the trigger, but it was just a man, clad in flannel and denim, weathered features pinched with suspicion as he eyed me and my raised weapon. I slowly lowered my rifle, willing my pulse to return to normal. He was likely a local trapper, no real threat, but I still felt unsettled by his sudden appearance. "Howdy," I called out, forcing a neutral tone. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm the park ranger assigned to this sector." The man just continued to stare at me, bushy gray brows furrowed into a frown. "Ain't safe for you to be out here alone," he finally said, his voice a raspy croak. He jerked his head at the odd animal tracks, "especially not with those about." Tension coiled in my gut. Why? What do you think made them? A flicker of something dark and uneasy passed through the man's eyes before his expression shuttered closed. "Ain't no animal I've ever seen," was all he said. Then he turned on his heel and melted back into the trees, ignoring my shouted questions. I stared after him, perplexed and more than a little disturbed by the encounter. Just what the hell had that meant? Was it a warning? Glancing around uneasily, I set off again at a brisker pace than before, unable to shake the feeling of hostile eyes boring into my back. The pines pressed in close on either side, skeletal branches grasping. Afternoon shadows pooled in every hollow. My breath came harsh and fast in my ears. Suddenly, a flicker of movement far ahead froze me in my tracks. I squinted, not quite trusting my eyes. Something huge and dark had just slipped into the dense undergrowth, too quickly for me to make out any details. But it had walked on 2 legs, not 4. An icy dread seized my heart. There was something in these woods with me, something that had left those monstrous prints. And whatever it was no animal. At least, not like any I'd ever seen. With mounting unease, I pressed onward, rifle at the ready as the sun gradually dipped toward the serrated horizon. The unnatural stillness of the forest only heightened my paranoia, each crack of a twig underfoot sounding as loud as a gunshot in the oppressive hush. I should have turned back long ago, but I felt like a puppet yanked along on invisible strings, helpless to do anything but continue placing one foot in front of the other. The trail grew increasingly faint and overgrown, appearing less and less like any hiking path I was familiar with. Cold sweat slicked my palms where they gripped my gun. Rationally, I knew I couldn't have gone more than 10 miles from my starting point, but the forbidding wilderness seemed to stretch out infinitely in all directions, the peaks of the mountains obscured behind a wall of bristling pines. My internal compass spun uselessly, no longer able to get a fix on cardinal directions. It was as if the very landscape had subtly rearranged itself when I wasn't looking. To make matters worse, heavy gray clouds were massing on the northern horizon, the wind picking up with the promise of foul weather. The temperature plummeted, my breath pluming in the frigid air. Of all the times to be caught out after dark, in unfamiliar territory. An abrupt, blood-chilling sound shattered the silence, sending icy barbs of fear straight through me. It was a scream, ragged with anguish and terror, echoing through the twilit woods. The awful, inhuman keening rose and fell in ululating waves, setting my teeth on edge. But even more disturbing was how the scream segued into what sounded like garbled words, as if something was trying to imitate human speech. Gun raised, I pivoted wildly, trying to pinpoint the source of the ungodly noise, but it was impossible to discern a direction. The screams bounced and carried strangely, first sounding from one side then the other, as if the very trees were shrieking. Then, just as abruptly, the wailing cut off, plunging the forest back into eerie quiet. Somehow the silence was even more unnerving. My ragged breathing sounded obscenely loud in my own ears. What in God's name could have made a sound like that? I thought of the man I'd encountered, his dire warning. I didn't want to imagine what could have befallen him. Pressing onward with increased urgency, I soon stumbled across a scene straight out of a nightmare. The underbrush had been trampled and torn, pine needles scattered in disarray. Ribbons of cloth fluttered from the branches. With growing horror, I realized they were the tattered remains of clothing. A shirt, a single boot, a torn, blood-stained jacket that looked suspiciously similar to one the mysterious stranger had been wearing. Bile rose in my throat. Oh, Jesus. Now I knew what had happened to him. But where was the body? Or what was left of it? I saw no evidence of viscera or gore, just the shredded garments, snapping in the rising wind like macabre flags. I had to get out of here. Now. Before whatever had attacked him circled back around. Seizing the lapels of the jacket, I hurriedly stuffed it into my pack, not entirely sure why. Proof of what I'd discovered, perhaps. Then I whirled and crashed off into the gathering darkness, praying I could find my way back to the trail. But with night falling fast, I knew I couldn't keep blindly staggering through the pitch-black woods, easy prey for something that could shred a grown man to pieces. I needed to make camp, build a fire, try to survive until dawn. Though I doubted I would be getting any sleep, jumping at every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves. I located a small clearing, ringed by towering aspens, and set about gathering deadwood, my headlamp throwing eerie shadows on their bone-white trunks. The wind gusted and moaned, tossing the treetops wildly. More than once I thought I glimpsed a hulking silhouette lurking just beyond the pool of light. Gritting my teeth, I kept working, erecting a crude lean-to out of branches and heaping pine needles for insulation. Once the fire was crackling, beating back the claustrophobic darkness, I huddled close to its meager warmth, my gun across my knees. The temperature continued to plummet, but it wasn't just the cold that made me shiver. Though I was no closer to the unsettling truth, one fact was brutally clear. Something unutterably evil stalked these woods. And now I was lost, with no idea how to get back to safety. Hunkering down in my makeshift shelter, I steeled myself for a long and harrowing night, keenly aware of how vulnerable I was. Overhead, the wind shrieked a rising lament, sounding like a chorus of the damned. Despite my exhaustion, I knew sleep would not find me here. All I could do was pray for the dawn, and for deliverance from an ancient horror that had only begun to reveal itself. Darkness pressed in on all sides as I huddled by the fire, jumping at every snap and rustle from beyond the flickering circle of light. The aspens creaked and swayed ominously in the rising wind, skeletal branches clawing at the star-flecked sky. A gibbous moon hung bloated and sinister, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with movement just out of the corner of my eye. Despite telling myself it was just a trick of the firelight, I couldn't stop my fingers from tightening convulsively on my rifle, every sense stretched taut. The stench of my own fear sweat was acrid in my nostrils. I longed to radio for backup, but I knew it was useless. I was miles out of range. As the night dragged on, my already frayed nerves began to unravel completely. At first it was subtle, the prickling sensation of eyes boring into me from the underbrush, glimpsed silhouettes that flickered and vanished when I swiveled to face them head-on. But then I started to hear things. A rustle of footsteps, circling just out of sight. Snuffling grunts and growls that sounded far too close for comfort. And underneath it all, a constant whispering that ebbed and flowed like the susurration of the wind through the pines. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block out the eerie, sibilant murmurs, but they only seemed to grow louder, taking on the cadence of words in some guttural, unrecognizable language. It almost sounded like my name, repeated over and over in a distorted, mocking litany. Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl shattered the night, sending icy talons of dread raking down my spine. It was the same awful, inhuman keening I'd heard earlier, but this time it sounded like it was coming from right outside the boundary of my campsite. Heart jackhammering, I lurched to my feet and spun in a wild circle, my rifle's beam flashing over the chiaroscuro shapes of the trees. But the light seemed feeble, swallowed up by the hungry dark that crouched and gaped just beyond the fire's reach. To my horror, I saw that my meager supplies had been strewn about and trampled, my canteen punctured and leaking precious water into the needle-strewn ground. Massive animalistic footprints gouged the earth in a wide ring around the clearing. Dear God, it had been here, watching me, toying with me. I was debating the merits of staying put versus making a break for it when an enormous shadow detached itself from the tree line. My heart seized in my chest, throat closing up on a strangled scream. I fumbled for my gun, but my hands were shaking too badly to aim. The thing was huge, well over 7 feet tall, but it was no bear. It walked on 2 legs, its lurching, disjointed gait a twisted parody of a man's. Matted fur covered its powerful frame, so dark it seemed to drink in the firelight. Wicked talons tipped its gnarled hands, but it was the face that paralyzed me with mind-numbing horror. It was caught between beast and human, elongated jaws lined with jagged fangs, pointed ears tufted with dense fur. Slitted yellow eyes blazed with feral malice, and bizarrely, grotesquely, it opened that tooth-studded maw and spoke. "Found you," it rasped in a grating, distorted approximation of human speech. All alone in the deep, dark woods. I gaped soundlessly, my mind refusing to process the words. The sheer impossibility of that hellish visage forming coherent language. This couldn't be happening. I had to be hallucinating, lost in some vivid waking nightmare. But then the creature hunkered down on its haunches, those terrible eyes boring into mine with a fevered, ravenous intensity. A chilling grin split its muzzle, strings of drool spattering the ground. "Ranger," it growled, "I've been watching you, waiting. These are my woods." With dawning, sickening certainty, I realized that the monster before me was no mere animal. It was something far more ancient. A primal evil that had haunted these woods for generations, spoken about only in hushed whispers around campfires, an old legend made terrifyingly real. I was face to face with the Dogman, and it had marked me as its prey. Adrenaline slammed through my veins as I stared into those terrifying yellow eyes, my mind whirling with the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. The creature before me defied all rational explanation. It was like something out of a fever dream, a twisted abomination cobbled together from spare parts. But there was no denying the malevolent intelligence that burned in its gaze, or the coiled power in its misshapen limbs. For a heart-stopping moment, we remained locked in that frozen tableau, predator and prey, separated only by the guttering fire between us. Then, with a blood-curdling roar, the Dogman sprang. I threw myself sideways on pure instinct, hitting the ground hard as a clawed hand swiped the space where my head had been a split second before. Rolling to my feet, I brought my rifle up and fired point blank into the creature's chest. The shots rang out deafeningly in the close confines of the clearing. But to my horror, the bullets seemed to have no effect. They punched through matted fur and corded muscle, dark blood blooming, but the Dogman barely staggered. With a snarl of rage, it batted the weapon out of my hands, sending it spinning off into the underbrush. I turned and ran, crashing blindly into the suffocating dark of the forest. Branches slashed at my face and arms as I plunged headlong through the trees, my breath coming in ragged sobs. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, the sounds of its pursuit spurring me to even greater speeds. Terror gave me wings, but I knew I couldn't outrun the Dogman for long. Not in its own element, the close-grown pines and rocky outcrops that it navigated with supernatural ease. My only chance was to find shelter, a defensible position, and pray that I could hold out until dawn. But as I fled deeper into the lightless woods, it quickly became apparent that the Dogman was toying with me. It would let me pull ahead, only to explode out of the shadows in front of me, forcing me to veer off in another direction. It was hurting me, driving me ever farther from my campsite, from any chance of retracing my steps to safety. I was hopelessly turned around, disoriented and lost. All I could do was keep running, lungs burning and legs trembling with fatigue. And all the while, the Dogman's taunting growls and barks echoed through the trees, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited me, should I falter. Finally, I burst out of the tree line onto the pebbly shore of a small stream, gasping for breath. I splashed across the icy water, hoping to break my scent trail, and plunged back into the woods on the other side. But I'd barely made it a dozen yards before a dark shape came hurtling out of the undergrowth, slamming into me with terrifying force. I crashed to the ground, the impact driving the breath from my lungs. Claws raked down my back, shredding through my jacket and drawing blood. I cried out in pain and fear, struggling desperately to free myself. But it was no use. The Dogman was immensely strong, pinning me easily beneath its bulk. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt the creature's hot, fetid breath on the back of my neck as it leaned down close. Slow, it hissed in that awful, distorted voice. Too easy. Want to have more fun first. With a laugh that chilled me to the bone, the Dogman released me and melted back into the shadows as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving me cowering on the forest floor, my clothes in tatters and my body racked with tremors. This was a game to it, I realized. The Dogman was playing with me, savoring the thrill of the hunt. It would stalk me, wear me down, feeding on my fear. Only when I was too spent to run anymore would it finally close in for the kill. Despair crashed over me, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. I was bruised, bloody, and utterly alone, hunted through a primordial wilderness by a monster out of legend. Death felt terribly close, crouched in the darkness beyond the tree line. But through the haze of exhaustion and fear, a flicker of determination stirred. If I was going to die out here, I wouldn't die cowering and sniveling like a rabbit in a snare. I would die fighting, on my feet, staring into the eyes of my killer. I owed myself that much. With a pained grunt, I pushed to my hands and knees. Then, slowly, I stood, ignoring the agony of my wounds. Straightening my shoulders, I turned to face the vast, whispering woods, my resolve hardening. "All right, you son of a bitch," I called out into the waiting dark. "You want to hunt? Let's hunt." From deep in the shadows, a harsh, barking laugh rang out in response, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. So be it. Drawing in a shuddering breath, I limped off into the trees once more, senses straining. I had no illusions about my chances. This was the Dogman's domain, and it would run me down sooner or later. But I was done being its plaything. If the Dogman wanted a fight, I'd give it one, even if it killed me. At that moment, death almost seemed preferable to being toyed with, my sanity slowly shredded by the malign entity that haunted these woods. The hunt was on again, only this time I wasn't just prey. I was the bait for something even more dangerous, my own desperate defiance in the face of unstoppable evil. I could only pray it would be enough to see me through to dawn. One way or the other, this nightmare would end tonight. Win or lose, the final confrontation was coming. And God help me, I would be ready for it. I don't know how long I stumbled through those hateful woods, each rasping breath feeling like it would be my last. The Dogman kept pace with me, toying with its prey, occasionally allowing me a brief glimpse of its hideous bulk weaving skillfully between the trees. I never saw it head-on, only caught fleeting impressions in my peripheral vision. A gaping maw lined with crooked teeth here, a malevolent yellow eye there. It was almost as if the creature was insubstantial, melting in and out of the shadows at will. But the sounds were always there. A huffing grunt as it scented the air. The deliberate crack of a branch underfoot. Twigs snapping. That awful guttural growl, often right behind me, so close I imagined I could feel its putrid breath on my neck. It was trying to break me down psychologically before it moved in for the kill, eroding my sanity through a campaign of sustained terror. And God help me, it was working. Panic gripped me tighter with every passing minute, exhaustion leadening my limbs. I was on the ragged edge, about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. I began to hallucinate, imagining the trees themselves had twisted to leer at me with demon faces. But just as I was on the verge of total collapse, the ground abruptly opened out before me into a small, moonlit clearing. And there, tucked against the far tree line, was a ramshackle cabin. Timbers gray with age and one window boarded over. For a moment I simply stood staring at it, my fatigue-addled brain struggling to process this unexpected stroke of luck. A shelter. Sanctuary. A defensible position where I could catch my breath, maybe even wait out the night. It was almost too good to be true. Sudden hope spurring me on, I staggered across the clearing and shouldered through the rotting door, nearly tripping over the lintel in my haste. Only after I had slammed it shut behind me and dropped the crude bolt into place did I allow myself a moment of relief, slumping against the wall and closing my eyes. My harsh breath sounded loud in the stillness, but my respite was short-lived. As I raised my head and looked around, I realized with a shudder of revulsion that I was not the cabin's first visitor. Not by a long shot. The place was scattered with dusty, forgotten belongings, a mildewed sleeping bag, a backpack, its straps hanging at broken angles, rusted cans of food strewn across the floor, labels faded with age, and propped in the corner, a fly-specked hiking boot, its companion nowhere to be seen. They were the remnants of the Dogman's previous victims, I realized with sickening certainty. Ill-fated travelers over the years who had fled to this remote place seeking refuge from the beast, only to discover it was a trap. They had huddled within these very walls in their final moments, knowing there was no escape. Left to the mercy of the monster playing its sadistic games. My gorge rose, and I nearly vomited right there on the warped floorboards. But with an effort, I forced down my revulsion and made myself examine my new surroundings more carefully. For amidst the discarded belongings there were other things too, strange totems bound with sinew and feathers, bits of bone carved with alien runes, a charcoal sketch on the wall of a hulking, snouted figure with glowing eyes, recognizable from native folk tales, all of it hinting at some deeper, darker origin to the creature hunting me. As I pored over these grim artifacts with a growing sense of unease, a terrible realization crashed over me. The cabin wasn't a sanctuary, it was a museum of horrors. A trophy room for the Dogman to revisit its most satisfying kills. Suddenly, I knew with piercing clarity that the creature had never intended for me to escape into these woods. It had herded me here, to this remote spot, to become part of its collection, to await my fate just as those who had come before. I was trapped. The cabin was a killing jar, and I was the insect pinned and wriggling inside, with no hope of deliverance. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows in the corners writhing with unspeakable things. Outside, a branch cracked like a gunshot, shattering the illusion of safety. I whipped around to face the door, my heart leaping into my throat. Through gaps in the weathered planks, I glimpsed a massive, hairy silhouette, blotting out the stars. The Dogman had come to claim its prize, confident that I had nowhere left to run. This was it, the moment of truth, fight or flight, kill or be killed. With desperate strength, I wedged a chair under the door handle as a makeshift barricade. Then I turned and frantically scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon, a rusted hatchet, a shard of glass. God damn it, I would go down swinging if I had to, because out there, death waited on 4 legs. But in here, a defiant spark still smoldered in my chest. I had made my choice. The final confrontation was upon me, and if the Dogman wanted to finish the hunt, it would have to come through me first. The door of the cabin exploded inwards with a deafening crack, torn clean off its hinges by the sheer force of the blow. My chair barricade was sent flying, timbers splintering like matchsticks. And then the Dogman was across the threshold, filling the doorway with its massive, twisted bulk. This close, with nowhere left to hide, the creature was even more terrifying to behold. It towered over me, all matted fur and corded muscle, its elongated limbs tipped with savage claws. Its eyes were a baleful yellow, alight with a feral, malicious intelligence. They bored into me with an intensity that felt like an almost physical weight pressing down on my chest. For a moment, neither of us moved. We simply stared at each other through the gloom, the only sound my ragged breathing and the wet, hungry gnashing of the beast's jaws. A strand of viscous drool splatted on the floorboards between its front paws. Then, to my utter horror, the Dogman's form began to shift and flow like heated wax. Its outline blurred, resolving into an even more nightmarish shape. The jutting muzzle flattened and receded, dark fur melting away to reveal pallid, corpse-like flesh. Vaguely human features sculpted themselves from the planes of its face, a jutting brow, a sneering mouth, a quivering beard of matted hair. Dear God, it was changing to resemble a twisted parody of a man before my very eyes. Some grotesque merger of beast and human. An abomination against all natural law. "Ranger," it growled, the words mangled and distorted, forced out through a throat never meant for speech. "Found you. Nowhere left to run." I cringed away from the sound of that awful voice, my sanity fracturing. How could this be happening? What eldritch sorcery could allow such a thing to exist, to wield language like a clumsy bludgeon? But I didn't have time to ponder the biological impossibilities. With a roar, the dogman lunged, wickedly taloned hands outstretched. I threw myself sideways, rolling behind an overturned table as those terrible claws raked the air where I'd been standing a split second before. Squirming on my belly, I scrabbled madly amidst the detritus littering the floor until my hand closed around the haft of the rusted hatchet I'd seen earlier. Surging to my feet, I whirled to face my attacker, the makeshift weapon held out before me like a talisman. "Stay back!" I screamed, not caring how thin and reedy my voice sounded, edged with hysteria. "I'm warning you!" The dogman stalked towards me, its movements unnaturally fluid for something so large. A chilling parody of a grin split its face, revealing a nightmare maw of misshapen teeth. "No escape," it rumbled. "Just you and me now, as it should be." With speed that belied its bulk, the creature darted forward, raking at my face. I swung the hatchet in a wild, defensive arc, more out of blind panic than any real skill. By sheer luck, I felt the rusted blade bite into flesh, drawing a warm spatter of stinking ichor. The dogman reeled back with an ear-splitting howl, black blood oozing from a gash in its chest, but it was far from deterred. If anything, the wound only seemed to enrage it, stoking its bloodlust to new heights. It came at me again in a frenzy of slashing talons and gnashing teeth, an avalanche of fur and fury. I hacked and stabbed desperately with the hatchet, trying to keep those snapping jaws at bay. But it was like fighting a force of nature. No matter how many blows I landed, the dogman kept coming, an inexorable juggernaut. We crashed around the cabin, smashing through rotten furniture in a whirlwind of destruction. Glass shattered, timbers splintered, ragged gouges marred the walls. All the while, the dogman taunted me, spitting out my name in that guttural, distorted voice. "Ranger, nowhere to hide anymore." My arms burned with fatigue, my lungs heaving like bellows. But I refused to give in, even as the creature's palavering bore into my skull like a dentist's drill. I would fight to my last breath. I would make the bastard work for its kill. "Why?" I heard myself shout over the din of smashing wood. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The dogman paused in its relentless assault, swaying on its misshapen legs. When it spoke again, there was an undeniable edge of mocking laughter in its tone. Silly little man, so frail, so easily broken. It lurched towards me, lips skinning back from those awful teeth. "I haunt these woods. I hunt because it is my nature. Because I hunger." With dawning horror, I realized the truth. The dogman didn't need a reason to torment me. It simply reveled in the fear and suffering of its prey. I was a mouse batted between the paws of a cruel house cat, and it would play with me until it tired of the game. Despair crashed over me. How could I possibly hope to win against something so primordial, so utterly evil? Exhaustion tugged at my limbs, my blood flowing freely from a dozen wounds. This was a battle I could not hope to survive. But even as that grim understanding settled over me, I felt a curious sense of peace. If I was going to die here, I would die on my feet, weapon in hand. I would make the dogman choke on my defiance to the bitter end. Hefting the hatchet, I charged forward with bellowing a wordless battle cry. I charged straight at the looming horror, hatchet raised high. The dogman's eyes widened in surprise at my sudden aggression, but then it let out a guttural bark of laughter, spreading its arms wide as if to welcome my attack. We collided in a maelstrom of flailing limbs and snapping teeth, crashing to the blood-slick floor in a writhing tangle. I plunged my blade over and over into the creature's hide, dark ichor spattering my face and arms. The stench of its pelt filled my nostrils, cloying and rank. But for all my desperate savagery, I could do little real damage. The beast's hide was preternaturally tough, resisting all but the deepest thrusts. And all the while the dogman laughed and snarled, its voice an insane yammering that battered at my sanity. Clawed hands closed around my throat, tightening like a vice. Spots swam before my eyes as I choked and gasped, consciousness guttering like a candle flame. But somehow, through the red haze of pain and suffocation, my scrabbling fingers found the hatchet's haft once more. With the last of my fading strength, I brought the weapon up in a mighty two-handed arc, directly into the dogman's misshapen face. There was a brittle crunch of splintering bone, and the creature's skull split like a ripe melon, drenching me in a hot wash of brains and blood. The monster convulsed, its grips on my throat loosening, but still it clung tenaciously to life, thrashing and mewling as I wriggled free and staggered upright on watery legs. Half blind with exhaustion and terror, I hacked at the beast over and over, long past the point of surety, until it finally lay still and silent in a spreading pool of viscous gore. I stood over the corpse, breath rasping harshly in my raw throat, hardly daring to believe it was over. The creature's yellow eyes stared sightlessly at nothing, already clouding with death. The tongue lolled obscenely from its slackened jaws. With a final shudder of revulsion, I turned away, bile rising in my gorge. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived the long, nightmare chase, the final confrontation. But I knew I would bear the scars, both physical and mental, for the rest of my days. No one walked away from an ordeal like this unchanged. The first pale fingers of dawn were stealing through the trees as I stumbled from the cabin on unsteady legs, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and the abattoir I had left behind. I had no idea which direction to go, no real hope of finding my way back after the panicked flight of the previous night. But it hardly mattered. I simply needed to move, to keep putting one foot in front of the other until I emerged from this primeval hell. As I lurched through the lightning woods, a distant part of my mind registered that the oppressive, watchful silence had lifted, replaced by the normal sounds of birdsong and wind-rustled leaves. It was as if the Dogman's death had released the forest from a malevolent enchantment, allowed it to breathe easily once more. Only time would tell if the creature's reign of terror was truly over, if whatever eldritch sorcery had birthed it died with its physical form. But for now, a fragile peace had descended. The long night was over. I had walked through the valley of the shadow, stared into the abyss, and through bloodshed and sacrifice, I had overcome. But I knew one thing with a leaden certainty that sat like a stone in my gut. My battle against the Dogman may have ended, but something told me the war was far from over. There were other monsters out there in the trackless wilds, other legends waiting to be stirred to wakefulness. And after what I'd witnessed, what I'd endured, I knew my path was clear. I would hunt them down, one by one, no matter how long it took. I was a predator now, too, baptized in blood and fear, and I would not rest until I had cleansed the world of every last vestige of their evil. It was a grim purpose, a heavy mantle to take up, but I could no more shirk it than I could forget the horrors seared into my memory. Someone had to stand watch against the darkness. Someone had to protect the innocent and unaware. I paused at the edge of a sunlit meadow, looking back over my shoulder at the glowering eaves of the forest, already cloaked in shadow despite the early hour. Somewhere in those tenebrous depths, the Dogman's foul spoor still lingered, a psychic taint that would never fully dissipate. "I'll be seeing you," I whispered, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. "In the dark places, in the secret hours, when I close my eyes." Then, squaring my shoulders, I turned my back on the whispering trees and limped off into the uncertain future, clutching my hard-won wisdom like a talisman against the ghosts that would forever haunt me. It was finally over. But even as the cleansing rays of the morning sun washed over my upturned face, I knew better than to believe it would ever truly end. I've seen enough weird stuff in this town, but nothing ever came close to what happened in 2002 in Elk Point, South Dakota. Let me start there. My name is Mason Gallagher, and I've been the sheriff of this little speck of land for close to 10 years. Never thought I'd live a life of paperwork and broken taillights, but here I am. Anyway, Elk Point is a small town. You're more likely to get bored here than get into any real trouble. Or so I thought. Elk Point sits nestled between rolling farmland and patches of dense forest that most locals avoid after dark. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do, where the diner serves the same special every Thursday, and where the most exciting thing to happen most weeks is when Old Man Jenkins argues with the grocery store clerk about expired coupons. That Wednesday morning started like any other. I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee at my desk, thumbing through reports of minor vandalism at the high school and a dispute between the Hendersons over their property line. The station was quiet, except for the constant hum of the ancient air conditioner that struggled against the summer heat. Officer Tyler Smith was at the desk across from mine, fresh out of the academy and still wearing his uniform like it was some kind of superhero costume. Kid had been here 3 months and still thought he was going to crack some big case and end up on the cover of Time magazine. I caught him watching crime documentaries on his lunch break once. Had to explain that in Elk Point, the closest thing to a criminal mastermind was Jimmy Peterson, who'd been caught stealing lawn ornaments while drunk last 4th of July. "Any big plans this weekend, Sheriff?" Smith asked, not looking up from his computer. "Same as always. Might go fishing if the weather holds." I took another sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. "You?" "Thought I might drive up to Sioux City, check out that new bar that opened." His enthusiasm was almost painful to witness. "You should come along." I chuckled. "I'm a bit past the age of bar hopping, Smith." The radio on my desk crackled to life before he could respond. Dispatch's voice cut through the static. "Sheriff, got a 911 call from out by the old Monroe place." Caller disconnected but sounded distressed. "Mentioned something about a man and a body." I frowned, setting down my mug. The Monroe place had been abandoned for years, ever since their daughter Lily disappeared back in '92. That was before my time as sheriff, but the case was infamous around these parts. 17-year-old girl vanishes without a trace. No evidence, no witnesses, nothing. The Monroes stuck around for about a year after, hoping for answers, but eventually packed up and left. Can't say I blame them. Some wounds never heal. "Probably just kids messing around," I said. But something in my gut didn't feel right. "I'll check it out." "Want me to come with?" Smith perked up, probably hoping for something more exciting than paperwork. "No, stay here. Cover the phones. Probably nothing anyway." I grabbed my keys and hat. "Hey, Smith, cover for me while I check out some joker out by the old Monroe place." Smith gave me a nod but didn't even look up from his desk. Kid still thought he could solve murders with one hand and eat donuts with the other. He had no idea. The drive out to the Monroe place took about 15 minutes, the cruiser kicking up dust along the old county road. The landscape changed gradually from the neat houses and trimmed lawns of town to sprawling farmland, then to the more overgrown, forgotten areas at the edge of our jurisdiction. The Monroe house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, partially hidden by overgrown trees that hadn't been tended to in years. As I pulled up, the first thing that struck me was the quiet. You know, that kind of quiet that gets under your skin, the kind that doesn't sit right. That's what this was. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Just a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow up every sound. The house itself looked worse than I remembered. 2 stories of faded white siding, windows boarded up or broken, the front porch sagging like it might collapse at any moment. The yard was a jungle of waist-high weeds and brambles. No cars in sight. If someone had called from here, where were they? I sat in my cruiser for a moment, scanning the property. Nothing moved, no signs of life, just an abandoned house slowly being reclaimed by nature. But something felt off. I'd learned to trust that feeling over the years, that little voice in the back of your head that tells you when something isn't right. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Gallagher. I'm at the Monroe place. No signs of anyone around. Any chance you could trace that call?" "Negative, Sheriff. Call came from a prepaid cell. Couldn't get a location beyond the general area." "Great. 10-4. I'll take a look around." I stepped out of the cruiser, the summer heat hitting me like a wall. It had to be pushing 90, but there was something else in the air, a heaviness that had nothing to do with humidity. I adjusted my gun belt out of habit and approached the house. The porch steps creaked under my weight, threatening to give way. I paused at the front door, which hung askew on rusted hinges. The windows on either side were boarded up, but gaps between the planks allowed thin shafts of light to penetrate the gloom inside. "Hello? Sheriff's Department. Anyone here?" My voice sounded small against the vast silence. No response, just that unsettling quiet. I tried the door. It swung open with a groan that seemed to echo across the empty fields. The smell hit me immediately, a musty, damp odor that comes with abandonment, but underneath it, something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rot. And not the kind that comes from an old house left to decay. No, this was fresh, organic, human. I'd smelled it before at crime scenes and car accidents. It's the kind of smell you never forget and hope you never encounter again. But here it was, faint but unmistakable, wafting from somewhere inside the darkened house. Hello? Anyone in here? This is Sheriff Gallagher. My hand moved to my holster, resting there as I took my first step inside. The floorboards creaked, dust motes dancing in the beams of light that managed to penetrate the gloom. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing the skeletal remains of what was once a family home. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, water stains mapped the ceiling, and what little furniture remained was broken or rotting. Something crunched under my boot, and I looked down to see shards of glass scattered across the floor. A picture frame, the photo long gone, the glass smashed. Recent by the looks of it. Someone had definitely been here. As I stood in the entryway, that feeling of wrongness intensified. There was something about this place that went beyond simple abandonment or decay, something malevolent that seemed to seep from the very walls, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, that smell was getting stronger. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The layout was simple. One large room, a kitchen off to the side, and a back hallway leading to what must have been bedrooms. I moved cautiously through the main room, my boots stirring up years of dust with each step. The living room still held the ghost of what it once was, a sagging couch against one wall, a wooden rocking chair by the long, cold fireplace, shelves emptied of their contents. On one wall hung a single photograph, somehow overlooked when the Monroes cleared out. I stepped closer, wiping away a layer of grime with my thumb. A family of 3, mother, father, and a teenage girl with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lily Monroe, I presumed, the girl who vanished. Looking at her face, captured in that moment of forced happiness, sent a chill through me despite the summer heat. I continued my sweep, moving into the kitchen. The cabinets hung open, empty except for mouse droppings and cobwebs. An old refrigerator stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar. I didn't bother checking inside. Nothing good ever comes from looking in abandoned refrigerators. But there, on the kitchen counter, something caught my eye. A cell phone. Modern, sleek. Definitely not something that had been here for years. I picked it up, careful not to smudge any prints. The screen was cracked, but it lit up at my touch. The battery indicator showed nearly dead. This had to be the phone used to make the 911 call. I scrolled through it quickly. No contacts, no messages. Just a call history showing the 911 call made 30 minutes ago. A burner phone, likely, but who brought it here? And where were they now? That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thumping from down the hall, like something soft hitting against wood. Regular, deliberate. My heart rate picked up. Hello? Sheriff's Department? Anyone back there? No answer, but the thumping continued. I drew my weapon, holding it low but ready as I approached the hallway. The smell of decay grew stronger with each step, clinging to the back of my throat like a physical thing. The hallway stretched ahead of me, darker than it should have been for mid-afternoon. 3 doors led off it, 2 on the left, 1 at the end. All closed. The thumping was coming from behind the door at the end. I moved slowly, checking the first door on the left. It swung open to reveal what had once been a bathroom. The fixtures were stained with rust, the mirror above the sink shattered. Nothing of interest. The second door opened onto a small bedroom. Children's wallpaper, faded and peeling, still clung to the walls. A small bed frame stood in one corner, the mattress long gone. This must have been Lily's room. Something about the room felt off. It took me a moment to realize what it was: the dust. Unlike the rest of the house, which was covered in a thick layer of the stuff, the floor here showed signs of recent disturbance. Footprints, multiple sets, leading in and out. The thumping continued from the room at the end of the hall, growing more insistent. I approached carefully, gun raised now, every sense on high alert. This is Sheriff Gallagher. I'm armed. Identify yourself. No response except for that steady thumping. I reached for the doorknob, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open with my foot, keeping my body to the side in case someone was waiting to ambush me. The room beyond was larger than the others, probably the master bedroom. Heavy curtains covered the windows, allowing only thin slivers of light to penetrate. But it was enough to see the source of the thumping, a loose shutter outside banging against the window frame in a breeze I couldn't feel inside the stifling house. I almost laughed with relief. Just a shudder, my imagination getting the better of me. Then I saw her. She was crumpled in the corner of the bedroom. Her body, a woman, maybe mid-20s, was bent in a way no human body should bend. Limbs at unnatural angles, twisted. I'd seen enough to know she wasn't just dead. She had been torn apart. But here's the kicker. There were no signs of struggle. No blood on the walls, no claw marks, no footprints. Just her, laying there like some broken doll tossed aside. I approached cautiously, gun still drawn. The woman wore jeans and a t-shirt, both torn and stained dark with dried blood. Her face was largely intact, though her expression was frozen in a mask of terror. Her eyes, still open, stared at nothing. Dark hair, matted with blood. No ID that I could see. What struck me most was the lack of blood around her. For the amount of damage done to her body, there should have been pools of it. Instead, the floor beneath her was relatively clean. She hadn't been killed here. She'd been moved, placed here deliberately after death. I crouched beside her, careful not to disturb anything. The wounds on her body were unlike anything I'd seen before. Deep lacerations, yes, but with jagged edges, like she'd been torn rather than cut. And there, running up her arm and across her shoulder, bite marks, large ones with distinctive teeth patterns that didn't match any animal I was familiar with. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Sheriff, you still at the Monroe place? Everything okay?" I stepped back from the body, pressing the talk button. "Dispatch, I've got a 1054 female victim, mid-20s. Send backup and contact the coroner. And get Smith out here, too." 10-4, Sheriff. Help's on the way." I returned my attention to the body, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The injuries weren't consistent with any weapon I knew. Not a knife, not a gun. More like claws. And those bite marks. What kind of animal could do this? The room suddenly felt colder, despite the summer heat. I stood, scanning the surroundings more carefully. That's when I noticed the closet door, slightly ajar. It hadn't registered at first, but now it seemed significant, especially since there appeared to be scratch marks on the wooden floor leading to it. I raised my gun again, approaching the closet slowly. "Sheriff's Department. Anyone in there? Come out with your hands up." No response. I reached for the door handle, took a deep breath, and yanked it open, stepping back quickly. The closet was empty, or at least empty of people. But on the floor lay a pile of something. Cloth? Skin? I couldn't tell from a distance. I leaned closer, using my pen to lift the material. It was clothing, shredded almost beyond recognition, but underneath something else. Something that looked disturbingly like shed skin, leathery and scaled in places. And beside it, a human-looking fingernail, but elongated and curved like a claw. My stomach turned. Whatever had done this to the woman wasn't just an animal. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. And judging by the freshness of the body and the evidence, it might still be nearby. A sound from outside the room grabbed my attention, a soft thud, like something heavy shifting its weight on the old floorboards. And then, a low, rattling breath that was unmistakably not human. I wasn't alone in this house. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, that wet, rasping breath, closer now, coming from the hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs, but years of training kicked in. I positioned myself against the wall beside the door, gun raised, ready. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Slow, deliberate footsteps approached. Whatever was out there, it wasn't trying to hide its presence anymore. I had two options: wait for it to enter the room and potentially be cornered, or confront it on my terms. I chose the latter. "Sheriff's Department, identify yourself," I called out, voice steadier than I felt. The footsteps stopped. For several heartbeats, nothing but silence. Then, a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. I stepped into the doorway, gun leveled. The hallway stretched before me, darker than before, shadows clinging to the walls like living things. At first I saw nothing. Then, the shadows at the far end seemed to coalesce, to take shape. There, near the doorframe, stood a figure. No, not stood. Crouched. It was humanoid, sure, but something about it was all wrong. The proportions. The shoulders hunched forward unnaturally. Long, sinewy arms that ended in thick claws. Claws that could easily tear through human flesh. Its face was barely visible in the shadows, but I could make out the outline of a wide jaw with sharp teeth, like a cross between a wolf and something ancient. It looked like an animal had learned to stand on two legs and found itself in a human skin, but only wore it halfway. We regarded each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Its eyes reflected the dim light, gleaming like polished copper coins. There was intelligence there, malice, hunger. "Don't move," I ordered, though I knew it wouldn't obey. Whatever this thing was, it didn't respond to human commands. It tilted its head, studying me with those unnatural eyes. Then its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a sound that was half roar, half scream. Before I could react, it charged. I barely had time to raise my weapon before it was on me. My first shot went wild, but the second landed solidly in its shoulder, sending it stumbling back. Blood sprayed across the room, thick, dark, and smelling like iron and decay. But the thing didn't stop. It lunged again, and I felt its claws rip through my vest, grazing my ribs. I fired again, this time hitting it in the chest. It staggered, this time slower, its breath labored. For a second, we just stared at each other, and in that moment, I felt like it wasn't just some wild beast. There was something behind its eyes, something calculating, intelligent, and full of malice. And then it collapsed. I stood there panting, my gun still drawn, unsure if I had killed it. The room was eerily quiet now, the only sound the low gurgling from the creature's chest as it struggled to breathe. Its body twitched, and then it went still. My heart was still pounding, but I had to be sure. I approached cautiously, nudging it with my boot. Dead. I crouched beside the body, inspecting it. Its skin was leathery, almost reptilian, but with patches of fur. I didn't know what I was looking at. Something between a wolf, a reptile, and something out of a nightmare. Blood oozed from the bullet wounds, black and viscous, nothing like human blood. The creature's limbs were disproportionately long, ending in those vicious claws that had nearly gutted me. Its face was the most disturbing part, almost human in structure, but with a protruding snout and that mouthful of shark-like teeth. I turned back to the woman's body, and my stomach turned as I noticed bite marks running up her arm, jagged, tearing bites that matched the creature's mouth. This thing had killed her, fed on her, and then, what? Brought her here? Why? The sound of tires on gravel outside pulled me from my thoughts. Backup had arrived. I straightened up, wincing at the sharp pain in my side where the creature's claws had caught me. Making my way down the hallway, gun still at the ready, I checked each room one more time to ensure there weren't more of these things lurking in the shadows. The house was clear, but that didn't ease the dread that had settled in my gut. Suddenly I heard a car pull up outside. Back up. Smith had probably sent someone after I hadn't radioed back. I left the house, my legs still shaking, to meet Deputy Brad Jacobs, a veteran officer who'd been with the department almost as long as I had. "Jesus, Gallagher, you look like hell." "What happened?" Brad said, stepping out of his cruiser. I must have been a sight, uniform torn, blood seeping through at the ribs, face pale with shock. "You're going to want to see this," I muttered, leading him inside. Brad followed me cautiously, hand on his holster. When we reached the bedroom and he saw the woman's body, he let out a low whistle. "Christ, what did this to her?" "That," I said, pointing to the creature's corpse in the hallway. Brad's face went pale, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What the hell is that thing?" "I don't know," I said, the adrenaline finally leaving my body, making me feel shaky and weak. "But it's dead." Brad walked around it, keeping a wide distance, like it might spring back to life at any second. "You shoot it?" "Twice." I showed him my torn vest. "It came at me, nearly got me too." "What do we do with it?" Brad asked, looking from the creature to me. I didn't have an answer for him. Not one that made sense anyway. We couldn't exactly take it back to the station and file it under unusual wildlife. But this wasn't going away either. There was a dead woman, a creature, and a whole town that would soon want answers. "We need to call this in," Brad said, but not to the locals. "FBI maybe, or I don't know who handles whatever this is." I nodded. The body wasn't disappearing. It wasn't some figment of my imagination. And whatever it was, someone higher up the food chain needed to know. But as I reached for the radio to call it in, something gnawed at me. What if this wasn't the only one? What if these things had been out here living in the woods, picking off people from small towns like ours for years, and we'd been chalking it up to accidents, disappearances, or even just bad luck? Brad looked at me. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I didn't have to ask. We were both thinking it. There could be more. Within the hour, the old Monroe house had transformed from an abandoned relic to a buzzing crime scene. Smith arrived with the coroner, Dr. Jenkins, and shortly after, 3 state police cruisers pulled up. I'd called it in as a homicide with an unidentified assailant, purposely vague. Some things you need to see to believe. I stood on the porch, smoking a cigarette I'd bummed from Brad, watching the controlled chaos unfold. My side had been patched up by the EMT, 3 deep gashes that would leave scars but wouldn't kill me. I'd been lucky. The woman inside hadn't been. Dr. Jenkins approached, pulling off latex gloves stained with the creature's black blood. The old coroner had seen just about everything in his 40 years on the job, but even he looked shaken. "In all my years, Mason," he said, voice low so the others wouldn't hear, "I've never seen anything like that thing in there. Not natural, whatever it is." "Any idea what it could be?" I asked, though I wasn't expecting answers. Jenkins shook his head. "Closest I can figure is some kind of genetic anomaly. Hyper-aggressive pituitary condition, maybe. Could explain the elongated limbs, the jaw structure. But those teeth, those claws. I don't know, Mason. This isn't something they covered in medical school." "What about the woman?" I asked. "We know who she is yet?" "No ID on her. Fingerprints might tell us something once we get her back to the lab. Cause of death is pretty clear, though. Massive trauma, blood loss. Those bite marks. They match the creature's dentition exactly." I took a long drag of the cigarette, letting the smoke burn my lungs. "So it killed her, without a doubt, and fed on her, from what I can tell. Consumed a significant amount of tissue from her thighs, abdomen, and left arm." I felt sick. Jesus. Jenkins nodded grimly. "Whatever this thing is, Mason, it's not just some mutant animal. The way it attacked, the way it fed. There's something deliberate about it, intelligent. That matched what I'd seen in its eyes right before I shot it. That calculating look. The awareness." Before I could respond, a black SUV with government plates pulled up. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, faces impassive behind sunglasses despite the fading light. "Here we go," I muttered to Jenkins. "The feds are here." The taller of the two approached us. "Sheriff Gallagher, Agent Wilson, Department of Interior. This is Agent Thomas. We're here about your unusual situation." "Department of Interior?" Not FBI, not CDC, not any agency I'd expect to handle a case like this. Red flags went up immediately. "Didn't realize the Department of Interior handled homicide cases," I said, watching his face carefully. Wilson's expression didn't change. "We handle special cases that involve potential impact on wildlife and environmental concerns. I understand you encountered an unidentified animal." "Something like that," I replied. "It's inside, along with its victim." Wilson nodded to Thomas, who headed into the house. "I'll need a full statement from you, Sheriff, and I'll need to see your wounds as well." "Already been treated," I said. "Nothing serious." "Nevertheless," Wilson insisted, "these cases require thorough documentation, protocol." Over the next hour, I gave my statement 3 times, each recording seemingly malfunctioning in some way. They photographed my injuries, took blood samples, and had me walk them through the encounter step by step. All standard procedure, they claimed, but nothing about this felt standard. By nightfall, a perimeter had been established around the property. No press, no locals. Just official vehicles and personnel with various agency insignias that all somehow seemed vague and interchangeable. The body of the creature was loaded into a specialized containment unit, essentially a high-tech coffin with monitoring equipment attached. The woman's remains followed in a standard body bag. Both were placed in the back of an unmarked van. "Where are you taking them?" I asked Wilson as they prepared to leave. "To a secure facility for further examination," he replied smoothly. "Standard procedure for unknown biological specimens." "And when do I get the report?" Wilson removed his sunglasses, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "Sheriff, I appreciate your cooperation in this matter. What happened here today was unfortunate. But I need to be clear. This incident is now classified. The official report will indicate a bear attack. The victim will be identified once next of kin are notified. But what you saw, what you think you saw, that stays here." "A bear attack?" I scoffed. "That thing wasn't a bear." "No," Wilson agreed, his voice dropping. "It wasn't. But what it was is now a matter of national security. You understand?" I didn't, not really, but I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know when I was being stonewalled. "And if I don't play along?" Wilson smiled thinly. "Sheriff, you're a dedicated public servant. You want to protect your community, so do we. The best way to do that is to keep what happened here quiet. Mass panic doesn't help anyone." Before I could argue further, Brad approached. "Mason, got something you should see." I followed him to the edge of the property, where the overgrown yard met the beginning of the forest. He pointed to the ground, where a set of tracks led into the trees. Tracks identical to those the creature had left inside the house. "These are fresh," Brad said, "and they're not coming from the house. They're going in." I stared at the tracks, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "There's more than one," Brad nodded grimly. "That's what I'm thinking. Have you told them?" I nodded toward the government agents. "Not yet. Thought you should see first." I considered our options. The feds clearly knew more than they were letting on. This wasn't their first encounter with these things, but they were also shutting us out, classifying everything. "Show them," I decided, "but make copies of those photos first. Send them to your personal email. And Brad, don't mention the Monroe girl, not yet." Brad raised an eyebrow. "You thinking there's a connection?" "I don't know. But a teenage girl disappears without a trace a decade ago from this same house, and now we find a creature that likes to eat people? Can't be a coincidence?" He nodded, understanding. "I'll keep it quiet." As Brad went to show the agents the tracks, I took one last look at the house. In the gathering darkness, it seemed to loom larger, more ominous than before. Whatever secrets it held, whatever had happened here, both recently and a decade ago, I had a feeling we were only scratching the surface. And I was certain of one thing. Those government agents didn't just happen to show up. They knew exactly what they were coming for. They'd seen these creatures before. By the time the state police arrived, I had locked the house down. The creature's body still lay on the floor, unmoving, and they brought in specialists to handle it. Word was it was being taken somewhere, off the books, though they didn't give us any details. All I know is it wasn't going to be in any public record. 3 days after the incident at the Monroe house, life in Elk Point tried to return to normal. The official story, as Wilson had promised, was that a woman, later identified as Megan Phillips, a hiker from Sioux Falls, had been attacked and killed by a bear. The bear had then been shot by local law enforcement. Case closed. But nothing about this was closed. Not for me. I sat at my desk in the station, reviewing the scant information we had managed to gather before the feds shut us down. Brad had come through with the photos of the tracks, and I had my own notes from the scene. Not much to go on, but it was a start. Smith walked in, dropping a file on my desk. "Pulled this from the archives, like you asked. All the missing persons cases within 50 miles, going back 15 years. "Thanks," I said, opening the folder. "Anything stand out to you?" Smith shrugged. "Most are resolved, runaways, domestic issues. But there's a pattern with some of the unsolved ones. Hikers, mostly. Solo travelers passing through, people who wouldn't be missed right away." I nodded, flipping through the reports. 17 unsolved disappearances in 15 years. Not an alarming number for the region, but when you looked at where they occurred... "They're clustered," I murmured, "all within a 10-mile radius of the Monroe place." "Noticed that too," Smith said. "And there's another thing. They're seasonal, almost all in late spring or early summer. Like now, like Lily Monroe, all those years ago." "You think there's a connection to whatever that thing was?" Smith asked, lowering his voice, though the station was nearly empty. I hadn't told Smith everything. He knew about the creature, had seen the body before it was taken away, but I hadn't shared my suspicions about there being more of them. No need to scare the kid more than necessary. I don't know, I said honestly, but something's not right. My phone rang. Brad. Sheriff, you're going to want to come out to the Miller farm, now. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to the Miller property, a cattle farm about 5 miles east of the Monroe house. Brad was waiting by his cruiser, face grim. What have we got? I asked as I approached. See for yourself, he said, leading me toward a fenced pasture. The smell hit me before we reached the fence. That same rotting odor I'd encountered at the Monroe house, but stronger now, fresher. Inside the pasture lay the carcasses of 3 cattle, torn apart in a way that was hauntingly familiar. Jesus, I muttered. Same marks? Brad nodded. Miller found them this morning. Says he heard something in the night but thought it was coyotes. By the time he got out here, whatever did this was gone. I crouched beside the fence examining the ground. There, in the soft earth, the same distinct tracks we'd seen leading into the forest. But multiple sets this time, at least 3 distinct patterns. They're hunting together, I said, a chill running down my spine despite the summer heat. Pack behavior, Brad agreed, like wolves. But these weren't wolves. They were something else entirely. Something that walked on 2 legs when it wanted to, that had hands capable of opening doors, that had eyes filled with malevolent intelligence. Miller see anything? I asked. Brad shook his head. Nothing clear. Says he caught a glimpse of something moving at the tree line, but it was dark. Described it as tall, too tall to be a person. I stood, surveying the tree line in question. Dense forest stretched from the edge of the pasture as far as the eye could see, eventually connecting to the larger wooded area that surrounded the Monroe property. They're moving, I said. Getting bolder. Or hungrier, Brad added. The implications were clear. If these creatures were establishing a hunting territory, expanding from their original range near the Monroe house, it was only a matter of time before they encountered more people, before someone else ended up like Megan Phillips. We need to go back to the Monroe house, I decided. There's something there, some connection we're missing. These things didn't just appear out of nowhere. Brad looked skeptical. The feds have the place locked down tight, Mason. No one gets in or out without their say-so. Then we don't ask for permission, I said. Tonight. Meet me there at midnight. The Monroe house looked different in the darkness, its silhouette stark against the night sky. Brad and I parked half a mile away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. As expected, the property was guarded. 2 men in black tactical gear patrolling the perimeter, floodlights illuminating the yard. Government security doesn't look like overkill for a bear attack, Brad whispered as we watched from the edge of the trees. No, it doesn't, I agreed. They know exactly what they're dealing with. We waited for a gap in the patrol pattern, then moved swiftly across the yard to the back of the house. A basement window, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs, provided our entry point. Once inside, we moved cautiously, flashlights casting long shadows across the dusty concrete floor. The basement was cluttered with abandoned furniture and boxes, the detritus of the Monroe family's hasty departure. But one section had been cleared recently, the dust disturbed. In its place stood metal shelving units filled with scientific equipment, sample containers, monitoring devices, things I couldn't identify. They've set up a lab, Brad said, examining the equipment. What the hell are they looking for? Same thing we are, I replied. Answers. I moved deeper into the basement, shining my light into corners that hadn't seen illumination in years. There, behind an old bookshelf, something caught my eye. A door, small and unassuming, that didn't match the rest of the house's architecture. Brad, I called quietly, help me move this. Together we shifted the heavy bookshelf, revealing the door fully. It was newer than it should have been, the wood unmarred by age or rot. And it had a modern lock, not original to the house. Someone added this, I said, examining the door frame. Recently, by the looks of it. Brad produced a lockpick set from his pocket. Good thing I misspent my youth, he said with a grim smile, going to work on the lock. It took several tense minutes, but eventually the lock clicked open. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that seemed to extend beyond the foundation of the house into the earth itself. The air that wafted from the opening was cold and damp, carrying that now familiar scent of decay. I hesitated, every instinct telling me not to proceed, but we'd come too far to turn back now. "Stay close," I told Brad, drawing my weapon, "and watch your back." The passage was roughly hewn, more like a mine shaft than a constructed tunnel. Our flashlight beams danced across rock walls slick with moisture. The floor descended gradually, taking us deeper underground with each step. After about 50 yards, the passage widened into a larger chamber, and there, the beam of my flashlight revealed what we had been looking for, and what I had been dreading. The walls of the chamber were covered in claw marks, some old and worn, others fresher. Scattered across the floor were bones, animal and unmistakably human. And there, in the center of the chamber, a nest of sorts. A depression in the earth lined with scraps of fabric, fur, and what looked disturbingly like human hair. "Mason," Brad's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Look." He pointed his light to the far corner of the chamber, where the rock wall gave way to another passage. And there, scrawled in what could only be dried blood, were words. Actual written words. "We return." A chill ran through me, colder than the underground air. These weren't just animals. They could write, they could think. They had been here before, and had come back. "We need to get out of here," I said, suddenly acutely aware of how vulnerable we were. "Now." Brad didn't argue. We backed out of the chamber, keeping our lights and weapons trained on that far passage, half expecting something to emerge from the darkness at any moment. We had almost reached the basement door when a sound froze us in place, voices from above. The government agents had returned. "More activity reported at the Miller farm," one voice said. "Team 2 is tracking them now." "And the nest?" another asked. "Dormant for now, but the seismic monitors show movement in the deeper tunnels. They're gathering, just like in 92. 92, the year Lily Monroe disappeared." "Timeline?" the first voice asked. "Accelerated. We're looking at days, not weeks, if we don't contain them this time." The voices faded as the men moved to another part of the house. Brad and I exchanged looks, the implications clear. Whatever these creatures were, the government knew about them, had known about them for decades, had been monitoring them, tracking them. And now, they were preparing for something big. We slipped out the way we had come in, making it back to our vehicles without detection. But as we drove away from the Monroe house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. "What now?" Brad asked as we parked at a deserted rest stop a few miles away. I stared out at the darkness, thinking about what we had discovered. About Lily Monroe and all the other missing persons. About Megan Phillips, torn apart and left like a warning. About those words scrawled in blood. "We return." "We prepare," I said finally. "Whatever's coming, it's happening soon. And I don't think the feds can handle it alone." As for me, well, we wrapped up the scene. But things never felt quite right after that day, and the thing is, we never saw anything like it again in Elk Point, at least not while I was on duty. But I'll tell you this much. Once you see something like that, it doesn't leave your mind. You start to wonder what else might be out there, hiding in the woods or lurking just beyond the edges of the town. You start to question whether some of those old stories, those ones you laughed off as a kid, might just have a grain of truth to them after all. And me? I keep my gun a little closer these days, just in case something decides to come back. Because they will. They always do. I never liked the night runs, but they paid better. I could get more mileage in without the traffic and make a decent living to support my kid. I'm Kyle Breckman, and I've been driving trucks since my early 20s. It wasn't something I loved, but it got the job done. You don't get into this line of work because you want excitement. You do it because it's steady, reliable. My wife left a couple of years ago, and that's when I started picking up more of the night shifts. There's something about the quiet that makes it easier to think or not think at all, if you know what I mean. But lately, things have gotten strange. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. as I pulled out of the truck stop outside Kansas City. The air inside the cab smelled of stale coffee and the cheap air freshener I'd hung from the mirror months ago. My thermos sat half empty in the cup holder, the coffee long since gone cold. I didn't mind. Cold coffee was better than no coffee on these overnight hauls. My daughter Ellie's picture was taped to the dashboard. 12 years old and already smarter than I'd ever be. Her smile was missing 2 teeth in that photo. They'd grown in since then, crooked as hell. Hence the braces we were saving for. Her mother, Jenny, had moved on with some insurance salesman named Richard who wore pressed khakis and probably had dental coverage. But that's not how things worked out for us. The radio played softly, some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories and UFO sightings. I usually kept it on for company, even if half the callers sounded like they'd taken too much of something or not enough of their medication. Tonight's topic was missing persons along America's highways. Perfect. You ever notice how many people just disappear on these roads? The host was saying in that theatrical whisper they all seem to practice. Hundreds every year, gone without a trace. I switched to music instead. Merle Haggard seemed safer than thinking about disappearances while driving through the middle of nowhere in the dark. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Dispatch. Unusual for this hour, but not unheard of. Breckman, I answered, eyes fixed on the empty stretch of highway ahead. Kyle, it's Terry. Got a change of plans for you. Terry Williams had been my dispatcher for 5 years. Good guy, reliable, didn't call at 2 a.m. unless it mattered. I'm listening. Got a secondary pickup for you. Extra load. Pays an additional $1,200 if you can fit it into your schedule before Denver. $1,500. That was 2 months of orthodontist payments right there. What's the catch? Terry paused, and I could hear him rustling papers on the other end. It's a bit off your route. Place called Mallory, about 50 miles north of where you'll be passing through Salina. Never heard of it. Yeah, well, it ain't exactly on the tourist maps. Small town. Got the address right here if you want it. I thought about Ellie's crooked teeth and the way she'd started covering her smile in photos. Yeah, send it through. I'll make it work. Good man. It's loading dock access only, so don't go to the front office. They're expecting you around 4:30. Don't be late. These guys are particular. What am I hauling? Another pause. Just some specialty equipment. Already cleared for transport. Paperwork's in order. Nothing to worry about. In my experience, when someone says there's nothing to worry about, that's exactly when you should start worrying. But I needed the money, and Terry had never steered me wrong before. All right, I'll head that way. Anything else I should know? Just be professional, all right? These clients are valuable to the company. Something in his voice made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Always am. I'll call when I'm loaded and back on the road. Thanks, Kyle. Drive safe. The call ended, and I adjusted my route on the GPS. An extra 50 miles north would eat into my schedule. But with the money they were offering, it was worth the detour. I'd still make Denver by early morning if everything went smoothly. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark save for the occasional set of headlights approaching from the opposite direction. The white lines blurred together after a while, hypnotic in their rhythm. My eyelids grew heavy despite the coffee, and I rolled down the window to let the cold night air slap me awake. Something darted across the road about 100 yards ahead, a deer probably, or maybe a coyote. I eased off the gas, but whatever it was had already disappeared into the tall grass on the shoulder. The wildlife was always more active at night, another hazard of the overnight hauls. One collision with a deer could put you behind schedule by hours, not to mention the damage to the rig. The detour took me off the main highway and onto smaller roads. The quality of the pavement deteriorated with each turn until I was crawling along at 40 miles per hour to avoid the potholes that could swallow a tire whole. My GPS struggled to find the location, the blue dot pulsing uncertainly on a road that barely registered on the map. You have reached your destination, the robotic voice announced, though all I could see were empty fields and a dirt road leading into darkness. I pulled over and checked the address Terry had sent. According to the coordinates, I should be right on top of this place, but there was nothing here except a rusty mailbox with no name and a dirt road that disappeared into a cluster of trees about a quarter-mile back from the highway. I considered calling Terry, but it was now close to 4 a.m., and I doubted he'd appreciate being woken up if I could solve this myself. I turned onto the dirt road, my headlights cutting through the darkness as the trees closed in around me. The branches scraped against the sides of the truck, a sound like fingernails on metal that set my teeth on edge. The road opened up into a clearing, and there it was, a warehouse that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. No signs, no exterior lights, except for a single bulb above what I assumed was the entrance, its yellow glow attracting moths that danced in frantic circles. The building itself was corrugated metal, rusted in places with no windows that I could see. It didn't look like any distribution center I'd ever delivered to. I checked the time, 4:28 a.m. At least I was on schedule, whatever this place was. As I maneuvered the truck toward what looked like a loading dock at the rear of the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at my side mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was only darkness. This was just another pickup, I told myself. Just another night on the road. But as I set the brake and killed the engine, the silence that settled over the cab was absolute, unnatural. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the wind in the trees, just silence, and the feeling that beyond the reach of my headlights, something was waiting. I sat in the cab for a moment, gathering myself. The warehouse loomed in front of me, its metal walls reflecting the moonlight in patches where the rust hadn't eaten through. My watch read 4:30 a.m. exactly. I grabbed my clipboard and flashlight, then stepped down from the cab. The air here was different. Heavier somehow, with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Not quite decay, but something forgotten, abandoned. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the loading dock, each step echoing in the stillness. There was no intercom, no bell to announce my arrival, just a metal door with peeling paint and a handle that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I was raising my hand to knock when it swung open. The man standing there was exactly as the dispatcher had described. Mid-50s, wiry build, with a face that looked carved from weathered stone. His hair was slicked back, unnaturally black against his pale skin, and his eyes were dark, calculating as they sized me up. "Breckman?" His voice was gravelly, like he'd been chewing on nails his whole life. "That's me. Got a pickup scheduled." He nodded once, sharp and efficient, and motioned for me to follow him inside. I hesitated for just a second, every instinct telling me to get back in my truck and drive. But $1,500 was $1,500, and Ellie needed those braces. The inside of the warehouse was dimly lit by overhead fluorescents that buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The smell hit me immediately, musty and stale, like old books left too long in a damp basement. But underneath that was something else, something metallic and sharp that reminded me of hospital corridors. Pallets were stacked against the walls, shrouded in heavy plastic that obscured their contents. The floor was concrete, stained in places with dark splotches I tried not to look at too closely. Industrial shelving filled most of the space, loaded with crates and boxes without any markings or labels. "Through here," the man said, leading me deeper into the warehouse. We passed through a series of corridors, each one identical to the last. I tried to keep track of the turns, left, right again, but soon lost my bearings. The place was much larger than it had appeared from outside, a labyrinth of metal and concrete that seemed designed to disorient. "Quite a setup you've got here," I said, trying to break the silence. "What kind of operation is this exactly?" The man didn't break stride or turn around. "Storage and distribution." "For what?" "Things that need to be stored and distributed." His tone made it clear that further questions wouldn't be welcome. We finally emerged into a larger area, where two other men were waiting by a loading dock. They were cut from the same cloth as my guide, hard-looking men with calloused hands and eyes that gave away nothing. One was taller, with a shaved head and arms covered in faded tattoos that disappeared under his rolled-up sleeves. The other was shorter, stockier, with a scar that ran from his left eye down to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. Neither of them spoke as we approached, but their eyes followed me, calculating and cold. They stood on either side of three large wooden crates, each about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. No markings, no shipping labels, nothing to indicate what might be inside. "Sign here," my guide said, handing me a clipboard. I glanced at the paperwork. It looked standard enough, a bill of lading with pickup and delivery information, but there were details missing. No company name on the letterhead, No specific address for delivery beyond local drop, Denver, no description of contents beyond specialty equipment. What exactly am I hauling? I asked, pen hovering over the signature line. The three men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Like I said, my guide spoke, his voice lower now, things that need to be distributed. Sign the paper. I'd hauled plenty of unmarked cargo before. Electronics companies were particularly paranoid about their shipments, and I'd signed my share of vague documentation. But something about this felt different. Wrong. Look, I need to know what's in these crates. Weight, at least? Hazardous materials? Anything that requires special handling? The taller man stepped forward, his movement fluid despite his size. You asking too many questions, driver. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more threatening. You get paid to drive. That's it. I looked back at the crates. Solid wood, reinforced with metal bands at the corners. Professional construction, at least. Whatever was inside was valuable enough to protect properly. No hazardous materials, my guide said finally. Non-perishable. Handle with care, temperature-controlled environment preferred, but not required. Weight approximately 200 pounds per unit. Delivery to the address provided, where you'll be met by our Denver associate. No further questions required. It wasn't nearly enough information, but I sensed it was all I was going to get. I needed the money, and these weren't the kind of men you argued with at 4:30 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. I signed the paper. Back your rig up to the dock, the shorter man spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly cultured in contrast to his rough appearance. We'll load you up. I nodded and headed back the way we'd come, or at least the way I thought we'd come. The tall man fell into step beside me, not speaking but making sure I didn't wander. The warehouse seemed to have shifted somehow, corridors appearing where I didn't remember them, but eventually we made it back to the entrance. I backed the truck up to the loading dock with practiced precision, then hopped out to supervise the loading. The three men worked with efficient movements, sliding each crate carefully into the trailer. They handled the cargo with a reverence that seemed at odds with their rough appearance, almost like pallbearers at a funeral. The thought sent a chill down my spine. All set, my guide said once the crates were secured. He handed me a sealed envelope. Your payment, the rest will be provided upon delivery. I opened the envelope and counted the cash, $750, exactly half the promised amount. The bills were crisp and new, sequential serial numbers. Our associate in Denver will provide the remainder, he explained. Address is programmed into this. He handed me a small GPS unit. Follow it exactly. Do not deviate from the route. Do not stop unless absolutely necessary. Do not open the crates, under any circumstances. What happens if I do? The question slipped out before I could stop it. The three men stared at me in unison, their faces expressionless. Drive safe, Mr. Breckman, my guide said finally. We'll know if you don't. I climbed back into the cab, the envelope heavy in my pocket. As I pulled away from the loading dock, I watched the men in my side mirror. They stood perfectly still, watching me leave, until the darkness swallowed them. The GPS unit on my dashboard blinked to life, plotting a route that would take me well off the main highways. I hesitated, then plugged it in. The money was too good to pass up, and I'd come this far already. As I navigated back to the main road, I glanced at my regular GPS. According to its map, I was driving through empty farmland. There was no warehouse, no town called Mallory, just empty fields for miles in every direction. I looked in my rearview mirror. The warehouse had disappeared, swallowed by the darkness, or simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. Only the weight of the crates in my trailer and the cash in my pocket proved that any of it had been real. The GPS unit blinked, urging me southwest, away from the main highways, away from other drivers, from witnesses. I had a bad feeling about this delivery, but I was already committed, already involved, and I needed that money. So I drove, the first hints of dawn still hours away, into a darkness that seemed to deepen with every mile. The road stretched before me, an empty ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Kansas landscape. According to my regular GPS, I was about 2 hours outside of Salina, heading southwest on a state highway I'd never traveled before. The specialized GPS unit they'd given me blinked steadily on my dashboard. its route avoiding major interstates and population centers. The clock on my dashboard read 5:47 a.m. Normally, the sky would be lightening by now, the first pale fingers of dawn reaching across the horizon. But the darkness seemed to persist, thicker somehow, as if reluctant to release its hold on the world. I turned on the radio, hoping for some weather news or at least some company in the quietness of the cab. Static crackled through the speakers, broken occasionally by fragments of voices too distorted to understand. I tried several frequencies, but the result was the same, static and whispers floating through the airwaves like ghosts. I switched it off and reached for my phone instead. No service. The screen showed a single bar that flickered in and out, teasing connectivity without delivering it. Even the GPS signal seemed weaker, though the unit they'd given me continued to function without issue. The highway narrowed as I continued, the shoulders growing tighter, the pavement rougher. Signs became scarce, and those I did pass were weathered beyond legibility, their messages lost to time and the elements. It had been at least 20 minutes since I'd seen another vehicle. The sense of isolation grew with each passing mile. I was used to solitude. It came with the job. But this was different. This was a disconnection, a severance from the world I knew. The darkness outside the windows seemed to press against the glass, watching, waiting. I shook my head to clear it. Lack of sleep and too much caffeine, that's all it was. The human mind plays tricks on itself in the small hours, creating threats from shadows and meaning from coincidence. I'd done enough night runs to know how the darkness can get to you if you let it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The crates in my trailer seemed to have a presence, a weight beyond their physical mass. I found myself checking the mirrors more often than necessary, as if expecting to see something moving back there. Around 6:30 a.m., I spotted a sign for a rest area 1 mile ahead. My bladder had been complaining for the last 20 minutes, and despite the instructions not to stop, some necessities couldn't be ignored. I signaled and took the exit, pulling into a small, deserted parking area with a single bathroom building and a few picnic tables. I left the engine running and the headlights on, illuminating the cracked concrete and overgrown grass. The bathroom building was a simple cinder block structure, its green paint peeling to reveal gray concrete beneath. The door hung slightly ajar, a rectangle of absolute darkness. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and approached cautiously. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the silent rest area. The beam of my flashlight revealed a Spartan interior. 2 stalls, a urinal, a sink with no mirror. The tiles on the floor were cracked and stained, but it was empty. No one waiting in the shadows. I used the facilities quickly, keeping my ears strained for any sound beyond the normal creaks of an old building. As I washed my hands in the sink, the water ran rust-brown for several seconds before clearing. I dried my hands on my jeans and headed back to the truck. The night air was cold against my face, carrying a faint smell of decay, like roadkill baking on hot asphalt. I quickened my pace, suddenly eager to be back in the cab, back in motion. As I reached for the door handle, I froze. There, in the beam of my headlights, standing at the edge of the parking area where the pavement met the grass, was a figure. A man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dirty suit, his clothes hanging on his frame as if he'd recently lost a great deal of weight. His hair was wild, unkempt, and his face, what I could see of it from this distance, was pale, almost gray in the harsh light of the high beams. He stood perfectly still, watching me. Not moving, not calling out, just watching. I raised a hand in greeting, unsure if this was another driver or some local who happened to be at the rest area at this ungodly hour. The figure didn't respond. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness surrounding us. "You need something?" No response, no movement, just that steady, unwavering gaze. A chill ran down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the warmth of my jacket. Something about him was wrong, the way he stood, the stillness, the complete lack of acknowledgement. I climbed into the cab and locked the door, my eyes never leaving the figure. Through the windshield, I watched as he took one step forward, then another, moving with a strange, halting gait, as if each movement required conscious thought. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking space, making a wide circle to head back to the highway. As I passed the figure, I got a clearer view of his face, illuminated briefly in the headlights. His eyes were wide and unblinking, sunken into a face that seemed desiccated, the skin stretched tight over prominent bones. But it was his expression that sent ice through my veins, a grin too wide for his face, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. And as I accelerated past him, I could have sworn those eyes followed me, turning in their sockets to track my movement even as his head remained stationary. Back on the highway, I pushed the truck as fast as I dared on the unfamiliar road. The image of that face, that grin, was burned into my mind. I checked my mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of the road behind me, still grinning, still watching. The specialized GPS beeped, indicating a turn onto an even smaller road. I followed its directions mechanically, my mind still at the rest area with the strange figure. It was then that I noticed the smell. Faint at first, barely perceptible above the normal scents of the cab. Coffee, air freshener, the lingering trace of the fast food burger I'd eaten hours ago. But it grew stronger with each passing minute, a sweet, cloying odor that reminded me of meat left too long in the sun. I checked the temperature controls for the trailer, everything normal. The crates were secure, no signs of leakage or damage when I'd loaded them. The smell had to be coming from outside, carried through the vents by the heater. But as it intensified, filling the cab with its sickly sweet stench, I couldn't deny the obvious anymore. It was coming from inside the truck, with me. I rolled down the window, gulping the cold night air. The smell diminished, but didn't disappear entirely. It clung to the interior, to my clothes, seeming to seep from the very fabric of the seat. The road ahead curved sharply, and as I rounded the bend, my headlights illuminated a figure standing at the side of the road. My heart lurched in my chest. It was him. The same man from the rest area, now 20 miles away, standing with his thumb out as if hitchhiking. The same dirty suit, the same gaunt face, the same terrible grin visible even at this distance. I swerved instinctively, the truck fishtailing slightly before I regained control. When I looked back, the figure was gone, the roadside empty. My hands were shaking on the wheel. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. The man couldn't have beaten me here on foot, and there had been no other vehicles at the rest area. It had to be someone else, someone who just looked similar in the brief glimpse I'd gotten. But the smell in the cab told a different story. It was stronger now, mixing with the metallic tang of fear that rose from my own skin. The radio crackled to life of its own accord, static giving way to a voice that emerged in fragments. Coming for... should have never... The cargo is... They're waiting. I slapped at the power button, but the voice continued, now seeming to emanate from the very air around me rather than the speakers. See you soon. The words dissolved into static, then silence. The smell began to fade, the air in the cab clearing gradually until only a faint trace remained, like a memory of rot. I drove on, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the mirrors behind me. The sky remained stubbornly dark, though my watch insisted it was now past 7 a.m. Dawn should have broken long ago. The specialized GPS beeped again, directing me onto a road so small it was little more than a paved trail winding through fields of wheat or corn, the crops indistinguishable in the darkness. I followed blindly, no longer certain of my direction or distance from Denver. The familiar landmarks of my usual route were long gone, replaced by this alien landscape of empty fields and abandoned farmhouses that loomed occasionally from the darkness. It was after one such house had passed from view that I saw the lights in my rearview mirror, headlights, bright and steady, gaining on me with alarming speed. Relief washed over me at first. Another vehicle, proof that I wasn't alone on this endless road, but as the lights grew closer, that relief turned to unease. There was something wrong about them. They were too bright, too steady, and they cast no illumination on the road around them, as if they existed in isolation from the physical world. And they were moving too fast, far faster than should have been possible on this narrow, winding road. I accelerated, pushing the truck harder than was safe on the unfamiliar pavement. The engine roared in protest, but the lights continued to gain, now close enough that they filled my mirrors with their unnatural brightness. The GPS beeped urgently, indicating a sharp turn ahead. I took it too fast, the truck leaning dangerously, the cargo shifting in the trailer with a heavy thud that I felt through the seat. For a moment I thought we would tip over, but the wheels held the road, and I straightened out onto yet another nameless stretch of asphalt. The lights behind me had disappeared. I scanned the mirrors frantically, but there was nothing. No headlights, no vehicle, no sign that anything had been following me at all. My breathing was ragged, my shirt damp with sweat despite the chill in the cab. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to call someone, to report. What? That I was being followed by impossible lights and a grinning hitchhiker who could teleport? That my radio was speaking to me and my cargo smelled like death? They'd think I was drunk, or on something, and maybe I was. Maybe this was all some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress and too many years of solitude on the road. But the fear was real. The smell had been real. And whatever was in those crates, I was becoming increasingly certain it wasn't specialty equipment. I pressed on, following the insistent directions of the GPS, driving deeper into a night that refused to end, toward a destination I was beginning to fear more than what lurked behind me. The next few hours passed in a haze of paranoia and exhaustion. I kept driving, following the specialized GPS, as it led me through a maze of back roads and forgotten highways. The darkness had become almost comforting in its constancy. At least it was familiar now, a known threat rather than the uncertainties that might come with daylight. By my watch, it was nearly 10 a.m., though the sky showed no signs of brightening. I'd been driving for over 7 hours since leaving the warehouse, but according to my regular GPS, which had finally regained signal about an hour ago, I was still more than 3 hours from Denver. The route they'd given me had taken me far south of my usual path, through areas of Colorado I'd never visited before. The smell had returned, fainter now but persistent, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. I'd grown almost accustomed to it, which frightened me more than the odor itself. What kind of man grows used to the smell of decay? I hadn't seen the hitchhiker again, or the strange lights, but the radio continued to emit occasional bursts of static and fragmented words. I'd stopped trying to make sense of them. Some things are better left ununderstood. Around what my watch claimed was noon, the GPS directed me onto a dirt road that cut through a pine forest, the trees pressing close on either side. The branches scraped against the sides of the truck like skeletal fingers, seeking entry. I hunched over the wheel, eyes straining in the gloom, following the narrow path deeper into the woods. The forest eventually thinned, opening onto a plateau that offered a view of the land below. In the distance, through a haze that might have been fog or my own fatigue, I could see the sprawl of Denver. So close, yet impossibly far. The GPS indicated I should continue along the plateau, following what was now little more than a game trail. I hesitated, unsure if the truck could navigate such a narrow path, but the memory of those men at the warehouse and the cash in my pocket pushed me forward. The trail hugged the edge of the plateau, a sheer drop of several hundred feet to my right. One misstep, one moment of inattention, and both truck and driver would be reduced to wreckage at the bottom of the ravine. I drove with agonizing slowness, hands slick with sweat on the wheel. It was during this precarious journey that I heard it. A sound from the trailer. A thump, distinct and deliberate, like something solid hitting the metal wall. I froze, foot hovering over the brake, ears straining. Nothing but the rumble of the engine and the crunch of tires on dirt. Then it came again. Thump, silence, thump, thump. Not random noises caused by the rough terrain. These were measured, intentional, almost like knocking. My mind raced through possibilities, each more implausible than the last. An animal that had somehow gotten into the trailer. A piece of equipment coming loose. The crates shifting due to the uneven road. But I knew better. The cargo was secure. I'd checked it myself before leaving the warehouse. And the sound was too regular, too deliberate for mechanical failure or shifting cargo. Something was in there. Something alive. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. It was the explanation that made the most sense. The secretive pickup, the unmarked crates, the insistence on a specific route away from populated areas. I was transporting people, possibly against their will. Bile rose in my throat. I'd heard stories, of course. Every trucker had. Modern-day slavery hidden in plain sight on America's highways. But I never thought I'd be a part of it, unwittingly or otherwise. I pulled over at the first spot wide enough to accommodate the truck, the tires crunching on loose gravel. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was somehow worse, charged with anticipation. I sat in the cab, weighing my options. If there were people in those crates, I couldn't in good conscience continue the delivery. But if I called the authorities, I'd be implicated. And if the cargo was something else entirely, drugs perhaps, or stolen goods, I'd still be in serious trouble. And then there were the men from the warehouse. "We'll know if you don't," they'd said. I believed them. The decision was made for me when the knocking resumed, more urgent now. Thump, thump, thump. Pause. Thump, thump, thump. The universal distress signal, SOS. I grabbed my flashlight and tire iron, the closest thing to a weapon I had, and climbed out of the cab. The air was cold and still, heavy with the scent of pine and something else, something that matched the lingering odor in the truck, the smell of meat gone bad. The trailer was secured with a padlock, the key given to me by the men at the warehouse, with strict instructions not to use it unless directed by their associate in Denver. I hesitated for only a moment before inserting the key, driven by a need to know what I'd been transporting all these hours. The lock clicked open. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find, and swung the doors wide. The interior of the trailer was dark, the only illumination coming from my flashlight and what little ambient light filtered through the open doors. The 3 crates were exactly as they had been loaded, secured to the walls with heavy straps, their wooden surfaces unmarked save for the metal reinforcements at the corners. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The knocking had ceased the moment I touched the lock. I climbed into the trailer, the beam of my flashlight playing over the crates. Up close, I could see details I'd missed during loading, small air holes drilled into the sides, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. And there, on the side of the nearest crate, a dark stain that glistened wetly in the light. I approached cautiously, tire iron held ready. The stain was fresh, still tacky to the touch, a viscous fluid that looked black but revealed itself as deep red when smeared between my fingers. Blood. My heart hammered in my chest. This was bad. Very bad. Whatever was in these crates, it wasn't equipment and it wasn't people being trafficked. At least, not living people. I should have left then. Should have closed the trailer, locked it up, and continued to the delivery point. Collected my money and forgotten everything I'd seen. That would have been the smart play, the safe play. But I couldn't. Not without knowing. The crate with the bloodstain had a simple latch on one side, designed to be opened from the outside. No padlock, no security measures beyond the general lock on the trailer itself. It was almost as if they expected, wanted, someone to look inside. I positioned myself to the side of the crate, out of the direct line of any potential threat, and used the tire iron to flip the latch open. The lid was heavy, but balanced on well-oiled hinges that allowed it to swing upward smoothly, revealing the interior in increments. The smell hit me first, a concentrated version of the odor that had been haunting me for hours. Decay and chemicals. The unmistakable stench of death arrested but not prevented. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth with my sleeve, but forced myself to look inside. The crate was lined with what looked like medical-grade refrigeration equipment, coils and compressors designed to maintain a specific temperature. And nestled within this makeshift cooling system was a body bag, black and sleek, zipped closed, save for a small opening near the top. From that opening protruded a hand, gray and waxy, the fingers elongated and stiff. A hand that had knocked against the side of the trailer, a hand that had signaled for help. I stumbled backward, nearly falling out of the trailer in my haste to get away. This was impossible. The hand was clearly dead, had been dead for some time, judging by the smell and appearance. Dead things don't move, they don't knock, they don't signal SOS. Yet as I watched, frozen in horror, the fingers of that impossible hand twitched, once, twice, then curled into a fist that struck the side of the crate with deliberate force. Thump. I was out of the trailer in an instant, slamming the door shut and fumbling with the padlock with shaking hands. It took 3 attempts to secure it properly, and even then, I wasn't sure it would hold against whatever was inside. Back in the cab, I sat trembling, unable to process what I'd seen. My mind rejected it, searching for rational explanations. Rigor mortis and chemical reactions could cause corpses to move, I knew that much from TV documentaries, but not with such purpose, such deliberation. The specialized GPS blinked on the dashboard, still indicating the route to Denver, to the delivery point, to the associate who was expecting this cargo. What was I delivering? Bodies, clearly. But why? Organ harvesting was my first thought, but those bodies had been dead too long for viable organs. Medical research? Possible. But why the secrecy, the remote pickup and delivery? And why had that hand moved, knocked, tried to communicate? I had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each passing moment. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. I wanted no part of this. Whatever was happening, whatever I'd stumbled into, I needed to get out. I started the engine, my mind racing. I could ditch the truck, take what cash I had, and disappear. People did it all the time. New name, new state, new life. Ellie would be devastated, but better a father who vanished than one in prison, or worse. But as I put the truck in gear, ready to turn around and head back the way I'd come, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice that emerged from the static was clear, unmistakable. "Keep driving, Mr. Breckman." It was the voice of my guide from the warehouse, as distinct as if he were sitting beside me. "You're almost there." I stared at the radio in horror. It wasn't possible. CB radios had limited range, and even if they were tracking me somehow, how could they know I'd stopped, that I'd looked in the crates? "The cargo is impatient," the voice continued, undeterred by my silence. "They've been waiting a long time. It would be unwise to keep them waiting any longer." They, not it. They. What are they? I found myself asking, though I dreaded the answer. The radio hissed and popped, the voice fading in and out like a bad connection. "Travelers, Mr. Breckman, just like you. Just trying to get home." The transmission ended, leaving only static in its wake. I switched off the radio, but the weight of those words remained, pressing down on me like a physical presence. Travelers, going home, in body bags. I looked at the GPS, at the route still illuminated on the screen. Denver was less than 2 hours away now. The delivery point, whatever it was, even closer. I had a choice to make. Turn around, try to outrun whatever consequences awaited me. Or continue, deliver the cargo, collect my money, and try to forget everything I'd seen. Neither option seemed likely to end well. But only one kept Ellie safely out of it. I put the truck in gear and continued along the plateau, following the GPS toward Denver, toward the delivery, toward whatever was waiting at the end of this nightmare road. Behind me, faintly audible even over the engine, came the sound from the trailer. Thump, thump, thump. Keeping time like a metronome, like a heartbeat. Counting down the miles to our destination. The descent into Denver should have been familiar. I'd made this drive countless times before, but everything was different now. The city lights below seemed alien, threatening rather than welcoming. Each curve in the road concealed potential dangers. Each shadow might hide something watching, waiting. The knocking from the trailer had stopped about an hour ago, replaced by a stillness that was somehow worse. I found myself straining to hear it again, perversely reassured by the evidence that whatever was back there was still active. The silence suggested either a change in status or a change in intent. Neither possibility was comforting. The specialized GPS guided me away from the main routes into the city, directing me through industrial areas and warehouse districts where the buildings stood dark and quiet in the early afternoon. Few vehicles passed me, and those that did, delivery vans, maintenance trucks, paid no attention to another semi navigating the back roads of the commercial zone. Eventually, the GPS indicated my destination was ahead on the right, a nondescript building set back from the road, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. No company name was displayed, no signs indicating business hours or services offered, just a loading dock and a small office entrance illuminated by a single security light. I pulled up to the gate, which was closed and presumably locked. A small intercom box was mounted on a post at driver's height. I rolled down my window and pressed the call button. No verbal response came, but the gate began to slide open with a mechanical whir. I took that as my cue and drove through, following the narrow driveway to the loading dock. As I backed the trailer into position, I noticed a single figure waiting by the dock, A man in a dark suit, his posture rigid, formal, not the type you usually found managing warehouse deliveries. He reminded me of the funeral directors I'd seen when my father passed, somber, professional, with an air of detached sympathy that never quite reached his eyes. I set the brake and climbed down from the cab, paperwork in hand. The afternoon air was cool against my face, carrying the industrial sense of diesel and concrete. After nearly 12 hours on the road, with only that sickly sweet odor for company, even the smell of exhaust was a relief. The man approached, his movements precise and economical. Up close, he was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, with close-cropped dark hair and pale skin that suggested he spent little time outdoors. His suit was expensive, well-tailored, incongruous in these surroundings. "Mr. Breckman," he said, his voice soft and cultured. Not a question. He knew exactly who I was. "You're later than expected." I handed him the paperwork. "Hit some delays on the route." His eyes flicked over me, taking in my disheveled appearance, the sweat stains on my shirt, the tremor in my hands that I couldn't quite control. One eyebrow arched slightly, but he made no comment. "The cargo is intact?" he asked, reviewing the documents with meticulous attention. I swallowed hard, remembering the knocking, the blood-stained crate, the impossible movement of dead flesh. "Seems to be. No issues during transport." He nodded once, apparently satisfied with my answer and the paperwork. "We'll unload now. You can wait in your vehicle." "Actually," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "I'd like to see this through. Make sure everything's handled properly." The man studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a small, tight movement of lips that never reached his eyes. "Of course. Professional thoroughness is always appreciated." He gestured toward the loading dock, where two more men had appeared, dressed in what looked like medical scrubs beneath light jackets. They wore latex gloves and face masks, giving them the appearance of hospital staff rather than warehouse workers. I followed the suited man up a small set of stairs to the dock level. He produced a key, identical to the one I'd been given for the trailer padlock, and handed it to me. "If you would do the honors, Mr. Breckman." My hand was steady as I took the key, though my heart hammered in my chest. I approached the trailer doors, inserted the key into the padlock, and hesitated only briefly before turning it. The lock clicked open, and I swung the doors wide. The interior was exactly as I'd left it. 3 crates secured to the walls, untouched and silent. No sign of movement, no evidence of the horror I'd witnessed hours earlier. If not for the lingering smell and the memory burned into my mind, I might have convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. The medical team, for that's how I'd come to think of them, moved with practiced efficiency, wheeling gurneys to the edge of the loading dock. They entered the trailer and began releasing the straps that secured the crates, their movements careful, almost reverent. "What exactly am I delivering here?" I asked the suited man, keeping my voice low. He regarded me with that same unreadable expression. "I believe the terms of your contract specified specialty equipment. That description is sufficient for your purposes. Is it human trafficking?" The question escaped before I could stop it, born of hours of fear and speculation. "Because if it is..." "It is not," he interrupted, his tone final. "Not in the sense you're implying. Nothing illegal is occurring here, Mr. Breckman. Nothing that should trouble your conscience." The medical team had freed the first crate and was carefully maneuvering it onto a gurney. They moved with the caution of men handling nitroglycerin, their faces obscured by the masks but their body language tense, alert to any shift or sound from within. "Then what is it?" I pressed, emboldened by the proximity to civilization, to witnesses, to an end to this nightmare journey. "What's in those crates that needs to be transported in secret along back roads in the middle of the night?" The suited man sighed, a sound of resignation rather than irritation. "You looked inside, didn't you? Despite explicit instructions not to do so." It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother denying it. "I heard knocking. From inside the crate. Someone, was trying to communicate." He nodded, as if this confirmed a suspicion. "They do that sometimes, especially during longer transports. It's a side effect of the preservation process. Neural activity continuing after clinical death. Like a chicken with its head cut off, still running around the yard." The explanation was delivered with such clinical detachment that it took me a moment to process the horror of what he was saying. These were dead bodies, officially at least, being transported for some unknown purpose. Bodies that still retained enough neural activity to knock, to signal for help. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The suited man watched as the medical team secured the first crate to the gurney and began wheeling it toward a set of double doors at the back of the loading area. "Volunteers, Mr. Breckman, every one of them. They signed the paperwork, understood the risks, accepted the conditions. This is simply the fulfillment of a contract." "Volunteers for what?" He turned to me then, his eyes searching my face as if gauging how much to reveal. "For continuation, for a journey beyond the limitations of conventional existence. Our clients are pioneers, in a sense, explorers of territories most would consider theoretical at best." The medical team returned with empty gurneys for the remaining crates. They worked quickly now, as if eager to complete the transfer and retreat behind those double doors with their unsettling cargo. "You're not making any sense," I said, frustration mounting. "What kind of journey can a dead body take?" The suited man's smile widened fractionally. "Who said anything about a dead body, Mr. Breckman? Clinical death is merely a transitional state, the cessation of certain biological processes. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of consciousness, of being." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that death, as you understand it, is a limited perspective, a cultural construct based on incomplete information." He gestured toward the trailer, where the final crate was being secured to a gurney. "Our clients have chosen to explore alternatives, to test the boundaries between states of existence." The medical team wheeled the last gurney toward the double doors, which swung open automatically as they approached. Beyond was a corridor, brightly lit and clinical, more hospital than warehouse. I caught a glimpse of other personnel inside, more individuals in scrubs, moving with purpose around equipment that looked both medical and unfamiliar. "The human consciousness is remarkably resilient," the suited man continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer. "Under the right conditions, with the appropriate preparation and technology, it can persist beyond the failure of its original biological housing. It can migrate. Migration. Travelers. Going home." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture too bizarre, too terrifying to fully comprehend. "You're talking about what? Soul transfer? Possession? That's unscientific? Superstitious? Please, Mr. Breckman." He actually chuckled, the sound devoid of genuine humor. "We're not dealing in mysticism here. This is advanced neuroscience, consciousness studies, quantum entanglement at the cellular level. The terminology is inadequate, I'll grant you, but the principles are sound, extensively tested, largely successful." The double doors closed behind the medical team and their cargo, cutting off my view of the corridor beyond. We were alone now on the loading dock, the suited man and I, standing in the shadow of my empty trailer. "So those people in the crates," I said slowly, trying to process this madness, "they're not really dead?" "Oh, they're certainly dead by any conventional medical standard," he replied casually. "Heart stopped, brain activity below measurable thresholds, cellular degradation beginning despite our preservation methods. But consciousness, that's another matter entirely. It persists in a state we might call suspension or transition, ready for relocation." "Relocation where?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The suited man glanced at his watch, a gesture that suggested our conversation was drawing to a close. "That's proprietary information, I'm afraid. Suffice to say that our clients have secured alternative accommodations for their continued existence. The details are covered by rather extensive non-disclosure agreements." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope identical to the one I'd received at the warehouse. "Your final payment as agreed, plus a bonus for discretion." He handed it to me, his eyes never leaving mine. "You've done good work today, Mr. Breckman. Transported precious cargo safely to its destination. That's something to be proud of." I took the envelope mechanically, feeling the weight of the cash inside. Blood money, I thought, though I wasn't entirely sure whose blood had paid for it. "What happens now?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile what I'd learned with my understanding of reality. Now? The suited man smiled that empty smile again. Now you go home, Mr. Breckman. Back to your life, your daughter, your normal roots hauling consumer goods and agricultural products. You forget about Mallory, about the warehouse, about everything you've seen and heard today. And perhaps, a few months from now, if you're interested in another specialty delivery, my associates will be in touch. He extended his hand, the gesture so normal, so businesslike that it seemed absurd after everything that had transpired. I found myself shaking it automatically, feeling the cool, dry skin against my palm. One more thing, Mr. Breckman, he said, his voice lowered confidentially. You might find yourself experiencing some unusual phenomena in the coming days. Dreams, perhaps. Sensations of being watched or followed. Glimpses of familiar faces in unfamiliar places. This is normal, a side effect of prolonged proximity to transitional entities. It will pass, eventually. With that, he turned and walked toward the double doors, which opened at his approach. He paused on the threshold, silhouetted against the harsh light from within. Drive safely, he said, and then he was gone, the doors swinging shut behind him with a final pneumatic hiss. I stood alone on the loading dock, the empty trailer behind me, the envelope of cash heavy in my hand. The parking lot beyond the fence was dark now, the sun having set during our conversation. In the distance, the lights of Denver twinkled, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the horrors that traveled their highways, the impossible cargo that moved among them in unmarked trucks during the dark hours. I returned to my cab and started the engine, its familiar rumble providing little comfort. As I pulled away from the facility, I glanced in my mirror and saw the gate closing automatically behind me, sealing off whatever secrets lay within those walls. Back on the main road, headed toward the truck stop where I planned to shower and rest before my return journey, I found myself scanning the sidewalks, the bus stops, the clusters of pedestrians waiting to cross at intersections, looking for familiar faces in unfamiliar places, for travelers who had found new accommodations. At a red light, I reached for my phone and pulled up Ellie's picture, her gap-toothed smile, her eyes bright with mischief and intelligence. I'd make this right, I decided. Take the money, pay for her braces, then find another job. One that didn't involve warehouses that appeared and disappeared, or cargo that knocked from inside its crate. One that let me sleep at night without wondering what traveled the highways after dark. The light turned green, and I continued on, trying to focus on the road ahead rather than the shadows at its edges. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. By eyes that had seen beyond the veil of death. By travelers who had found their way home through means I couldn't begin to comprehend. And somewhere in the back of my mind, like a radio tuned to a distant frequency, I could swear I heard knocking, faint but persistent, calling for attention, for recognition, for release. I turned up the radio to drown it out and drove on into the night, the envelope of cash on the seat beside me, the memory of Mallory already fading like a half-remembered dream or nightmare. Some cargo is best delivered and forgotten, some questions are best left unanswered, and some roads, once traveled, can never truly be left behind. The first light of dawn was just breaking over the eastern ridge as our convoy of 3 SUVs wound its way deeper into the wilderness. 6 hours from the nearest town, we'd left civilization behind, trading paved roads for dirt tracks that grew increasingly narrower with each passing mile. "You sure this is the right way?" asked Kaya, her Australian accent thick with concern as she peered out the window at the dense wall of pines that seemed to close in around us. "According to the GPS, yeah," I said, tapping the screen. "Another 20 minutes, and we should reach the access road to the cabin." Kaya nodded, though her expression remained tense. We'd been friends since college, and when I mentioned my plan for a wilderness getaway in the remote forests of the American Southwest, she was the first to sign up. She'd flown all the way from Sydney for this trip, joining our eclectic group that included my 3 friends from Canada and 2 old school buddies from my hometown. In the rearview mirror, I could see the other 2 vehicles following closely behind. Miles was driving the second SUV with Jonah and Noah, our friends from Toronto. Bringing up the rear was Zoe, who had Liam and River with her. We'd been planning this trip for months, 2 weeks at a secluded cabin beside a pristine mountain lake, deep in territory that bordered ancient Native American lands. "Did you read about the history of this area?" Kaya asked, scrolling through something on her phone. "There's all sorts of stories about strange happenings in these woods." "Like what?" I asked, navigating around a fallen branch in the road. "Well, the land we're headed to sits near the boundary of what was once Navajo territory. There are old stories about—" She hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. "About what?" "In Navajo culture, there's something called a skinwalker, a type of harmful witch who can turn into or disguise themselves as an animal," she said quietly. "The Navajo call it Yi Naldlushi, which means, with it, he goes on all fours." I laughed, though the sound came out more forced than I intended. "You believe that stuff?" Kaya shrugged. "I don't know. But traditionally, the Navajo won't even speak about these creatures to outsiders. It's considered taboo." "Well, good thing we're just going for a relaxing getaway and not hunting for folklore monsters," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. The GPS indicated we needed to turn onto a nearly hidden access road. As we made the turn, the forest seemed to swallow us whole, branches scraping against the sides of our vehicle. The morning light barely penetrated the dense canopy above, creating an eerie twilight effect despite the early hour. After another 15 minutes of increasingly rough terrain, the trees finally parted to reveal our destination. The cabin was larger than I'd expected, a 2-story structure of weathered logs with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it, the surface of the lake shimmered in the morning light, perfectly still and reflecting the surrounding mountains like a mirror. "Tsebi Hazdili," I murmured. "What's that?" Kaya asked, looking at me with curiosity. "It's what the locals call this place. It means whispering pines in Navajo. The rental owner mentioned it in his email." We parked in front of the cabin and began unloading our gear. The others soon joined us, their excited chatter breaking the profound silence that had settled over the lake. Miles was the first to reach the porch, bounding up the steps with his usual enthusiasm. "This place is incredible," he called back to us. "Look at that view." And it was stunning. The lake stretched out before us, surrounded by dense forest that climbed up the sides of the mountains. In the far distance, we could make out the snow-capped peaks that marked the boundary of the national forest. It was pristine wilderness, untouched and beautiful. Yet something about the silence bothered me. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just a stillness that felt unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shook off the feeling as we carried our supplies inside. The interior of the cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. A spiral staircase led to a loft that overlooked the living area, and several doors on the ground floor led to bedrooms and bathrooms. "I call the loft," shouted Noah, already racing up the stairs with his backpack. "There are 4 bedrooms down here," Zoe observed, "enough for everyone to have some space." We spent the next hour unpacking and settling in. By the time we finished, the sun was high in the sky, warming the porch where we gathered to plan our day. "I vote we explore the lake," suggested Liam, already pulling off his shirt. "Last one in is a rotten egg." The others quickly joined in, racing down to the dock that extended into the water. I watched them from the porch, smiling at their enthusiasm, but still unable to shake the strange unease that had settled over me since our arrival. "You coming?" Kaya called back to me. "In a minute," I replied. "Just going to get the cooler." Inside the cabin, I paused at the window, watching my friends splashing in the clear waters of the lake. The sunlight reflected off the surface, creating shifting patterns that danced across their laughing faces. Everything looked perfect, idyllic even. So why couldn't I shake the feeling that we were being watched? As I turned to grab the cooler from the kitchen, something caught my eye through the side window. A movement at the edge of the forest, just a quick flash of something dark and low to the ground. I squinted, trying to make out what it might have been, but whatever it was had disappeared back into the shadows of the trees. Probably just a deer, I told myself. Or maybe a coyote. But Kaya's words from earlier echoed in my mind. With it, he goes on all fours. I pushed the thought away and headed outside with the cooler, determined to enjoy our first day in paradise. The first signs of trouble came that evening. We'd spent the day swimming and exploring the immediate surroundings of the cabin, staying within sight of the lake. As the sun began to set, we gathered on the porch with drinks in hand, watching as the sky turned from blue to orange to deep crimson. "Time to get the fire going," announced Jonah, heading inside to the fireplace. "It's going to get cold once the sun goes down." Miles and I volunteered to gather more firewood. The rental owner had left a good supply stacked against the side of the cabin, but Miles insisted we'd need more for a proper fire. "I saw a fallen tree about 50 yards into the woods," he said, already grabbing a flashlight. "Come on, we can chop some fresh logs." I hesitated, looking at the darkening tree line. "Maybe we should just use what we have for tonight," Miles laughed. "Don't tell me Kaya's stories got to you. Come on, man, we'll be quick." Reluctantly, I followed him toward the edge of the forest, carrying an axe while he led the way with the flashlight. The shadows lengthened as we walked, stretching like dark fingers across the ground. The fallen tree was where Miles had spotted it earlier, a massive pine that had toppled in some recent storm. It would provide plenty of dry wood. We set to work chopping it into manageable pieces, the sound of our axe strokes echoing through the otherwise silent forest. "Doesn't it seem weird to you?" I asked as we worked. "What?" "How quiet it is. No birds, barely any insects." Miles paused, listening. "Huh, you're right. That is strange." A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our small circle of light. We both froze, peering into the gloom. "Hello?" Miles called out, swinging the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing moved. The beam of light revealed only more trees, their trunks creating a maze of shadows. "Probably just a deer," Miles said, the same explanation I'd given myself earlier. But I wasn't convinced. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger now, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. "Let's get back," I suggested, gathering as many of the logs as I could carry. Miles nodded, suddenly eager to return to the cabin as well. We hurried back, repeatedly glancing over our shoulders at the darkened forest behind us. When we reached the porch, Kaya met us with a concerned expression. "Everything okay? You guys look like you've seen a ghost." "Just spooked ourselves," Miles replied with a forced laugh. "Too many horror movies." Inside, the others had prepared dinner, and the warmth and light of the cabin soon chased away our unease. We ate, drank, and shared stories around the fire, the conversation flowing easily among friends. But every so often, someone would pause and glance toward the windows, where the night pressed against the glass like a living thing. After dinner, Zoe suggested we play a game. "I've got cards, or we could do charades." "How about ghost stories?" suggested River with a mischievous grin. "We are in the middle of nowhere, after all." A nervous laugh rippled through the group. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, thinking of the strange silence in the forest and the feeling of being watched. "Oh, come on," River insisted. "It's tradition. You can't go to a cabin in the woods and not tell ghost stories." Before I could protest further, the lights flickered, dimmed, and then went out entirely. The only illumination came from the fire in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. "Perfect timing," River laughed, though there was a note of unease in his voice. "Probably just a generator hiccup," Noah suggested, already heading for the door. "I'll check it out." "I'll come with you," Miles offered, grabbing his flashlight again. "Be careful," Kaya called after them, "and stay together." The rest of us huddled closer to the fire, trying to pretend we weren't rattled by the sudden darkness. Liam found some candles in a kitchen drawer and lit them, placing them around the room to create small islands of light. Outside, we could hear Miles and Noah talking as they circled the cabin, looking for the generator. Their voices grew fainter as they moved around to the back. "So, about those ghost stories," River began, seemingly determined to continue despite the ominous atmosphere. "Actually," I interrupted, "Kaya was telling me about some local legends on the drive up. Weren't you, Kaya?" All eyes turned to her. In the firelight, her expression was hesitant. "I don't know if we should talk about it," she said quietly. "Come on," urged Zoe. "If you've got a local spooky story, you have to share." Kaya sighed. "It's not just a story, it's a belief. In Native American lore, particularly Navajo, there's a being called a skinwalker." What's that? Liam asked, leaning forward. It's a type of witch that can transform itself into an animal, Kaya explained reluctantly. They're shapeshifters who can take the form of any animal at will. Like a werewolf? Asked Jonah. No, not exactly. Skinwalkers choose which animal to become based on the abilities they need, speed, strength, stealth, and they can change from one animal to another if they need to. And you think there are skinwalkers around here? River asked, his earlier enthusiasm for ghost stories somewhat dimmed. For the Navajo and other tribes of the Southwest, the tales of skinwalkers are not mere legend. The belief is strongly held, Kaya said. These woods are part of their territory. A heavy silence fell over the group. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, whispering through the pines that surrounded the cabin. But that's just a story, right? Jonah finally said. I mean, there's no such thing as... A scream cut through the night, shocking us all to our feet. It came from outside, somewhere behind the cabin, where Miles and Noah had gone to check the generator. What the hell was that? Zoe gasped. Before anyone could answer, the back door burst open and Noah stumbled in, breathing hard, his face pale with terror. Something's out there, he panted. Something not right. Where's Miles? I demanded, already moving toward the door. Noah shook his head, his eyes wide. It took him. It just took him. What do you mean, it took him? I grabbed Noah by the shoulders. What happened out there? Noah was shaking, his eyes unfocused. We found the generator behind the cabin. It just needed to be reset. But then, we heard something moving in the trees. What kind of something? River asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, it was dark. Miles shined his flashlight toward the sound, and we saw eyes reflecting back. Red eyes. Noah swallowed hard. Miles thought it was a coyote or something. He started walking toward it. And then, I prompted when Noah fell silent. It moved, so fast, not like any animal I've ever seen. It was on 4 legs, but then it stood up, like a man but not. And Miles. Noah's voice broke. It grabbed him, dragged him into the trees. I ran. Silence fell over the cabin as we processed Noah's words. The fire popped in the hearth, making us all jump. We need to call for help, Zoe said, already pulling out her phone. There's no signal, she added after a moment, her voice rising with panic. The landline, Liam suggested, pointing to an old telephone on the wall by the kitchen. Jonah rushed to it, picked up the receiver, and listened. Dead, he reported grimly. There must be a radio or something, I said, starting to search through the cabin's cupboards and drawers. The owner would have some way to communicate in case of emergencies. As we searched frantically for any means of contacting the outside world, a low, mournful howl rose from the forest. It wasn't like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. Too deep, almost human in its inflection. We all froze, listening as it was answered by another howl, this one from the opposite direction. They're surrounding us, Kaya whispered. We don't know that, I said, trying to sound rational despite my racing heart. But we need to find Miles. He could be hurt. Are you crazy? Noah exclaimed. We can't go out there. We can't just leave him, I argued. What if whatever dragged him away is still out there? If we go out there now, in the dark, with those things around, we'll all end up missing, Jonah reasoned. We need to wait until daylight. Another howl split the night, closer this time. It was followed by a scratching sound at the front door, like claws dragging down the wood. Zoe stifled a scream. River pulled her away from the door, back toward the fire. Whatever it is, it can't get in, I said with more confidence than I felt. The doors are solid, and all the windows have shutters. As if in response to my words, something heavy slammed against the side of the cabin, rattling the shutters on the windows. We heard more scratching, then a low growl that seemed to emanate from multiple directions at once. Get the shutters, I ordered, moving to the nearest window. Make sure they're all secured. Jonah, Liam, and River rushed to check the windows while Kaya, Zoe, and Noah huddled by the fire, armed with the fireplace poker and a heavy flashlight. I reached the first window and peered through a crack in the shutters. Outside the forest was a wall of darkness. Then, a movement caught my eye. Something large and dark loping across the clearing toward the lake. It moved with an unnatural gait, its limbs too long, its back hunched at an impossible angle. My breath caught in my throat. For a brief moment the thing paused and turned its head toward the cabin. In the faint moonlight, I could make out a vaguely canine shape, but its proportions were all wrong, too tall, too thin, and its eyes reflected the light with a reddish glow. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. "What did you see?" Kaya asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to describe it. Instead, I focused on what we needed to do to survive the night. "We need weapons," I said. "Anything we can use to defend ourselves." We scavenged through the cabin, finding a hunting knife in one of the kitchen drawers, the axe we'd used earlier for firewood, and a few other makeshift weapons. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the night wore on, the attacks against the cabin continued, scratching at the walls, heavy bodies throwing themselves against the doors, the constant howling that seemed to surround us completely. We took turns keeping watch, though none of us slept. The fire burned low, and we huddled around it, jumping at every sound from outside. "What do they want?" Zoe whispered during one brief period of quiet. "In the stories, skinwalkers are malevolent," Kaya replied grimly. "They want to cause harm. They can make people sick or even kill them." "But why us?" Liam asked. "Why here?" "Maybe we've trespassed on sacred ground," Kaya suggested. "This area is near ancient tribal lands." "Or maybe it's just wolves or coyotes," Jonah said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. Another heavy impact shook the cabin, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Something had broken through one of the shutters. "The bedroom!" Noah shouted, pointing toward one of the doors off the main room. We rushed to it, weapons in hand. Through the doorway we could see that the shutter on the window had partially given way. A long, dark arm was reaching through the gap, clawed fingers scraping at the glass. Liam lunged forward with the axe, swinging it at the intruding limb. There was a shriek, high-pitched and definitely not human, and the arm withdrew. Dark liquid spattered the window and the floor beneath it. "I got it," Liam said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "Quick, help me barricade this," I said, already dragging the bed toward the window. We pushed the heavy oak frame against the window, then piled the mattress and other furniture against it for good measure. But we all knew it was only a temporary solution. If these things were determined to get in, they eventually would. Hours passed in tense vigilance. The attacks grew less frequent as the night wore on, but none of us dared hope they had given up. Rather, it felt as if they were regrouping, planning their next move. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the shutters, the forest fell silent. No howls, no scratching, no impacts against the walls of the cabin. Just an eerie stillness that was almost worse than the attacks had been. "Do you think they're gone?" Zoe asked hopefully. "Skinwalkers are said to be creatures of the night," Kaya said. "Maybe they retreat during daylight. Or maybe they're just waiting for us to let our guard down," Noah countered darkly. I moved to one of the windows and carefully opened the shutter a crack. Outside, the forest was peaceful in the early morning light. No sign of movement, no strange creatures lurking in the shadows, just trees and the glittering surface of the lake beyond. "I don't see anything," I reported, "but that doesn't mean they're not out there." "What about Miles?" River asked. "We need to look for him." The thought had been weighing on me all night. Miles was my friend, and the idea of him out there, possibly hurt or worse, was unbearable. But I also knew the dangers of venturing outside. "We'll go in a group," I decided. "No one goes alone. We'll search around the cabin first, then gradually expand outward." "And if we find something?" Jonah asked, not specifying whether he meant Miles or one of the creatures. "We deal with it when it happens," I said grimly. "For now, let's focus on finding Miles." The morning air was crisp and cool as we cautiously stepped onto the porch. The forest around the cabin showed no signs of the night's terrors, no tracks, no blood, nothing to suggest that anything unnatural had occurred. But the generator housing had been torn open, its components scattered across the ground, and there were deep scratches in the wooden walls of the cabin that no normal animal could have made. "Stay close," I warned, as we moved as a group toward the area where Noah had last seen Miles. We found nothing at first, just trampled undergrowth and broken branches that could have been caused by any large animal. But then Liam spotted something glinting in the morning light. Miles's flashlight, the lens cracked and the metal casing dented, lay half hidden beneath a fallen log. This is where it happened, Noah said, his voice hollow. This is where it took him. We spread out slightly, searching for any sign of which direction the creature might have dragged Miles. Kaya was the first to spot the trail. Droplets of dark blood on leaves and twigs, leading deeper into the forest. We should follow it, I said, already moving in that direction. Wait, River called, grabbing my arm. What if it's a trap? What if they want us to follow? It was a valid concern, one I'd been trying to ignore, but the alternative, leaving Miles out there, was unthinkable. We stick together, I insisted. Everyone stays within sight of each other. If we see anything suspicious, we retreat immediately. Reluctantly, the others agreed. Armed with our makeshift weapons, we followed the blood trail into the forest. The morning sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy here, creating a perpetual twilight beneath the trees. The silence that had bothered me since our arrival seemed even more pronounced, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The trail led us on a winding path for nearly half a mile before ending at the mouth of a small cave set into a rocky hillside. Dark stains marked the entrance, and the ground in front was heavily disturbed, as if something large had been dragged inside. "Miles," I called out, my voice echoing back from the cave's entrance. "Miles, are you in there?" Silence was the only response. "We can't go in there," Zoe said, her voice shaking. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not leaving without knowing what happened to him," I replied, flicking on the flashlight we'd brought from the cabin. "Then I'm coming with you," Jonah said, stepping forward. "The rest of you stay here. If we're not back in 15 minutes, get back to the cabin and figure out a way to get help." Before anyone could argue, Jonah and I moved toward the cave entrance. The smell hit us first, a rank animal odor mixed with something else, something coppery and sickening. As we stepped inside, the beam of the flashlight revealed a narrow tunnel that descended into the earth. "Miles," I called again, my voice seeming to be swallowed by the darkness. We moved deeper into the cave, the flashlight beam revealing strange markings on the walls, symbols carved into the rock, some fresh, others worn with age. I didn't recognize them, but they sent a chill down my spine nonetheless. The tunnel widened into a small chamber, and there, in the center, was something that made my blood run cold. A pile of bones, some old and yellowed, others disturbingly fresh. And on top, a torn and bloodied piece of fabric that I recognized instantly. The plaid pattern of Miles's favorite shirt. "Oh God," Jonah choked out, turning away. I stood frozen, the flashlight beam fixed on the grisly discovery. We were too late. Miles was gone. A low growl from the darkness beyond the chamber snapped me out of my shock. The beam caught a flash of movement, then a pair of glowing red eyes. "Run!" I shouted, already backing toward the entrance. We scrambled out of the cave, panic giving us speed. The others saw our terror and didn't wait for an explanation, turning and running with us back toward the cabin. "What did you see?" Noah panted as we crashed through the undergrowth. "Miles is dead," I managed between gasping breaths. "And we're not alone in these woods." We burst out of the tree line near the cabin, relief flooding through me at the sight of its solid walls. But my relief turned to horror as we got closer. The front door hung open, swinging loosely on one hinge. Something had broken in while we were gone. "Zoe and River were right behind us," Kaya said, looking around frantically. "Where are they?" I spun around, scanning the edge of the forest. There was no sign of them. They must have fallen behind in our panicked flight from the cave. "We have to go back," Liam said, already turning. "No," I grabbed his arm. "We need to secure the cabin first. Then we'll go look for them." "But they know the way back," I insisted. "If they're okay, they'll head here. We need to make sure it's safe when they arrive." Reluctantly, Liam nodded. We approached the cabin cautiously, weapons at the ready. The interior was in shambles, furniture overturned, cupboards emptied, supplies scattered across the floor. But there was no sign of whatever had broken in. "Check every room," I ordered. "Make sure it's clear." We moved through the cabin methodically, finding destruction in every room but no intruders. The back door had been ripped completely off its hinges, providing another easy entrance. Whatever had done this had been incredibly strong. "It's looking for something," Jonah observed, gesturing to the systematic way the place had been ransacked. Or someone, Noah added grimly. As we finished checking the second floor, a scream echoed from outside, high-pitched and terrified. We rushed to the window in time to see River emerge from the trees, running at full speed toward the cabin. Behind him, moving with that same unnatural loping gait I'd glimpsed the night before, was a large, dark shape. "It's chasing him!" Kaya cried. We thundered down the stairs and out onto the porch. River was halfway across the clearing, his face contorted in terror. "Run!" I shouted. "We'll cover you!" Jonah and Liam rushed forward with their weapons while I kept watch for any other threats. River sprinted the final distance to the cabin, collapsing on the porch steps, gasping for breath. "Where's Zoe?" Noah demanded, helping River inside. "It got her," River panted. "We were running, and it came out of nowhere. Grabbed her. I couldn't help her." Another friend gone. Anger and grief welled up inside me, replacing the fear that had dominated since the first attack. "We're getting out of here," I decided. "Right now, we grab what supplies we can and make for the vehicles." "But Miles and Zoe," Kaya began. "Are gone," I cut her off, hating the words even as I said them. "And we'll be next if we stay." No one argued. We gathered what remained of our supplies and weapons, then huddled at the front door, planning our escape. "The SUVs are about 100 yards away," I said. "We move together, watch all sides. Once we reach them, we don't stop for anything until we're back to civilization." Everyone nodded, faces grim and determined. Our carefree vacation had turned into a fight for survival, but I was determined that no one else would fall victim to whatever hunted these woods. "On three," I said, hand on the door. 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the cabin and ran toward the parked vehicles. I kept expecting to hear growls or see shapes emerging from the trees, but the forest remained still and silent. We reached the SUVs without incident, piling into the lead vehicle, my own, for safety and numbers. I turned the key in the ignition, praying it would start. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Relief washed over me as I threw it into reverse, then stopped cold as I saw what was in the rearview mirror. Standing directly behind our vehicle, blocking the narrow track that was our only way out, was a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a man, tall and thin, dressed in what looked like animal hides. But as I stared, the figure seemed to shift and change, its proportions becoming more animal-like, then human again, as if it couldn't quite decide what form to take. "What is that?" Noah whispered from the back seat. "A skinwalker," Kaya breathed. "It can shift between human and animal form." As if hearing its name, the figure's head snapped up, revealing a face that wasn't quite human. The features elongated, the eyes too large and reflective, the mouth stretched in a grin that showed too many teeth. And then it spoke, in a voice that was both human and not, the words in a language none of us understood, but the threat behind them was unmistakable. "Drive!" Jonah shouted. "Run it over if you have to." I slammed my foot on the accelerator, but the engine sputtered and died. I tried the key again. Nothing. Whatever this thing was, it had disabled our escape. "The other vehicles," I said, already opening my door. "Wait!" Kaya grabbed my arm. "Look!" More figures had emerged from the tree line, 3, 4, 5 of them, all with that same not-quite-human appearance. They moved with eerie coordination, surrounding our position. "We're trapped," River moaned. I closed the door, locking it for whatever meager protection that might provide. The others did the same, huddling low in their seats as the creatures circled our vehicle. "What do they want?" Liam whispered. "Why are they doing this?" "We trespassed on sacred ground," Kaya said quietly. "This area has significance for the native tribes. We're intruders here." The first figure, the one that had been blocking our path, approached my window. Up close, its face was even more disturbing. Features that seemed to flow and shift, never quite settling into one form. It tapped on the glass with long, claw-like fingers. "Don't open it," Noah hissed. "No matter what." The creature's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. Then it stepped back and made a gesture to the others. They began to move in unison, circling the vehicle, their movements becoming faster, more frenzied. "What are they doing?" River asked, his voice barely audible. The answer came in a horrifying display of transformation. Before our eyes, the creatures began to change, their bodies contorting, limbs elongating, faces stretching into muzzles. Where there had been humanoid figures now stood massive wolf-like creatures, their red eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity. They're going to attack, I realized. We need to make a run for the cabin. We'll never make it, Jonah argued. We can't stay here, I countered. They'll tear the car apart. As if to prove my point, one of the creatures lunged at the rear of the vehicle, rocking it violently. Another joined in, claws scraping against metal with a sound that set my teeth on edge. The moment I give the signal, everyone out the driver's side door, I instructed. Stay together and run like hell for the cabin. No one looked happy with the plan, but no one offered a better alternative either. I reached for the door handle, waiting for the right moment. The creatures continued their assault on the vehicle, denting metal and cracking glass. One leaped onto the roof, its weight causing the ceiling to buckle inward. We were running out of time. Now, I shouted, flinging open the door. We spilled out of the vehicle, weapons in hand, and sprinted toward the cabin. Behind us, howls of rage filled the air as the creatures realized their prey was escaping. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. They were coming after us, moving with impossible speed on all fours. Faster, I urged, seeing the cabin just ahead. We reached the porch, scrambling inside and slamming what remained of the front door behind us. Jonah and Liam dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it, while Noah and River rushed to secure the back entrance. That won't hold them for long, Kaya said, watching as the creatures surrounded the cabin once more. Not after what they did earlier. She was right. We needed a better plan than just hiding. I tried to remember everything Kaya had told us about Skinwalkers, searching for any weakness we could exploit. In the stories, there must be some way to kill them, I said, turning to Kaya. What did you read about that? She thought for a moment. According to lore, a bullet or knife rubbed with white ash might work. White ash, I repeated. From the fire. I rushed to the hearth, where embers from the previous night's fire still glowed. Using a poker, I sifted through the ashes, finding patches of the fine white powder that Kaya had mentioned. Get the weapons, I called to the others. Anything with a blade or a point. They brought our meager arsenal, the hunting knife, the axe, several kitchen knives, and a few sharpened sticks we'd crafted the night before. One by one, we coated the blades and points with white ash from the fireplace. Outside, the creatures had begun their assault on the cabin once more. We could hear them tearing at the walls, throwing themselves against the doors and shutters. It wouldn't be long before they broke through. We need to split up, I said, distributing the weapons. Cover all possible entry points. If they get in, aim for vital areas, throat, chest, eyes. Split up? Noah echoed incredulously. After what happened to Miles and Zoe? We don't have a choice, I replied grimly. If we cluster in one spot, they'll overwhelm us. Reluctantly, we took positions throughout the cabin. Kaya and I covered the main room, Jonah and Liam the back entrance, Noah one side of the cabin, and River the other. We waited, weapons ready, as the attack intensified. The first breach came at the back door. The bookcase we'd pushed against it toppled forward as something massive slammed into it from outside. Jonah shouted a warning as one of the creatures squeezed through the gap, its red eyes fixing immediately on him. Remember, white ash, I called, already moving to help. The creature lunged at Jonah, who managed to sidestep the attack and swing his ash-coated axe in a wide arc. The blade connected with the creature's shoulder, drawing a shriek of pain and fury. But instead of falling, it rounded on him again, seemingly more enraged than injured. Before it could attack, Liam stabbed forward with his ash-covered hunting knife, catching the creature in the side. This time, the effect was more dramatic. Where the blade touched, the creature's flesh seemed to sizzle and smoke. It howled in agony, twisting away from the knife. It works, Liam shouted. The ash works. Emboldened, Jonah swung the axe again, this time striking the creature's neck. It collapsed to the floor, its form seeming to shimmer and shift before our eyes. One moment the wolf-like monster, the next a more human figure, then back again. There was no time to celebrate our first victory. More creatures were breaking in, through windows, the damaged doors, even tearing through the wooden walls in places. We fought desperately, using our ash-coated weapons to fend them off. I found myself back-to-back with Kaya in the main room, surrounded by 3 of the shapeshifters. They circled us warily, having seen what happened to their companion. Don't let them separate us, I warned, keeping my knife pointed at the nearest one. There's something else, Kaya said suddenly. In the stories, if you know a skinwalker's true name and speak it aloud, it robs them of their power. Great, but how are we supposed to know their names? I asked, dodging as one of the creatures lunged at me. I don't know, Kaya admitted, swinging her own weapon at another attacker. The fight raged throughout the cabin. Noah's scream from one of the bedrooms told me we'd lost another friend. But there was no time to grieve, no time to do anything but fight for survival. Somehow we managed to drive the creatures back, inflicting enough damage with our ash-coated weapons that they retreated temporarily. But our victory was short-lived. Of our original group of 8, only 4 remained. Myself, Kaya, Jonah, and Liam. Noah and River had fallen in the attack, their bodies dragged away by the retreating skinwalkers. We can't stay here, Jonah said, nursing a deep gash in his arm. They'll be back, and there are too many of them. Where can we go? Liam asked. They disabled the vehicles, and we're miles from anywhere. The lake, I suggested, an idea forming. If we can get to the dock, maybe take the boat. Water, Kaya interrupted. In many Native American beliefs, water is a boundary that evil spirits and witches cannot cross. So if we can reach the middle of the lake, I began. They might not be able to follow, Kaya finished. It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We gathered what remained of our weapons and supplies, reapplying ash to the blades. The sun was beginning to set, and we all knew that the creatures would be even more powerful in darkness. We go at dusk, I decided, in the last light. They'll be expecting us to wait until full dark to make our move. The others nodded, too exhausted and traumatized to argue. We spent the remaining daylight hours fortifying our position as best we could and preparing for our desperate dash to the lake. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the clearing, we gathered at what remained of the front door. Through the broken shutters, we could see the forest's edge, where shapes were already gathering, moving restlessly among the trees. Remember, stay together, I said. No matter what happens, we reach that dock as a group. And if we make it to the lake? Jonah asked quietly. Then we take the boat to the far shore and hike out, I replied. It's another 10 miles or so to the main road, but it's our best chance. Kaya squeezed my hand. In her eyes, I saw the same determination that I felt. We would make it, or we would die trying. Ready? I asked, gripping my knife tightly. 3 nods answered me. Then let's go. We burst out of the cabin and sprinted toward the lake. Immediately, howls erupted from the forest and dark shapes detached themselves from the shadows, racing to intercept us. But we had the advantage of surprise, and our head start gave us a chance. The dock was just ahead, the small rowboat still tethered where we'd left it days ago, in what now seemed like another lifetime. 50 yards, 40, 30, we were going to make it. Then Liam stumbled, his foot catching on a root. He went down hard, and before he could regain his feet, one of the creatures was on him. His scream cut through the twilight air, then was abruptly silenced. "Keep going," I shouted as Jonah hesitated. "We can't help him." We reached the dock, our feet pounding on the wooden planks. Behind us, the creatures were closing in, their howls triumphant. Jonah leaped into the boat first, helping Kaya in after him. I was last, untying the rope with fumbling fingers as the lead creature reached the beginning of the dock. The knot came free just as the creature launched itself at me. I fell backward into the boat, narrowly avoiding its reaching claws. Jonah shoved us away from the dock with an oar, and we began to drift into deeper water. The creature stood at the edge of the dock, its form shifting between human and beast as it watched us escape. Then, to my horror, it stepped forward, not into the water, but onto it. Its paw-like feet didn't break the surface, but rested upon it as if the lake were solid ground. "That's not possible," Kaya whispered. "They shouldn't be able to cross water." But the creature took another step and another, walking on the surface of the lake toward our slowly drifting boat. "Row!" I shouted to Jonah. "Row for your life!" He didn't need to be told twice, dipping the oars into the water and pulling with all his strength. The boat began to move faster, but the creature kept pace, its red eyes fixed on us with malevolent intelligence. Then it spoke again, in that same inhuman voice, words that seemed to float across the water's surface. Tsibi Hasdili, the name of the lake, Whispering Pines, in Navajo, and with a shock of realization, I understood. "It's their sacred place," I said. The lake itself is part of their territory, their power. Then we're trapped, Jonah said, still rowing desperately. There's nowhere to go. I looked back at the creature, still pursuing us across the water's surface. Behind it, more shapes had gathered at the shore, the rest of the pack, watching, waiting. The creature took another step toward us, and in that moment I made my decision. I stood up in the boat, causing it to rock precariously. "What are you doing?" Kaya hissed, grabbing my leg to steady me. I didn't answer. Instead, I fixed my gaze on the approaching skinwalker and spoke a single word, the name I'd heard it use, Tsebi Hazdili. The effect was instantaneous. The creature froze, its form flickering rapidly between human and beast. A howl of rage and what sounded almost like fear erupted from its throat. The surface of the lake beneath its feet seemed to ripple and give way, and for the first time the creature's confidence faltered. "Its name," I called out. "In the stories, if you know a skinwalker's true name and speak it, it robs them of their power." "Tsebi Hazdili," Kaya repeated beside me, her voice stronger. "Tsebi Hazdili." Jonah joined in, and together our voices rang out across the water. The creature's form seemed to become less substantial with each repetition, its howls turning to shrieks of agony. The water beneath it was no longer solid, and it began to sink, flailing as it was pulled under the dark surface of the lake. On the shore, the other creatures retreated into the forest, their howls fading into the gathering darkness. Whatever connection had bound them to this place, we had somehow broken it, at least temporarily. "Will they be back?" Jonah asked, still gripping the oars tightly. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we should keep moving." We rowed to the far shore in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, mourning the friends we'd lost. As we pulled the boat onto the rocky beach, I turned to look back at the cabin across the lake. In the last light of day, it looked peaceful, almost inviting, a deception that had cost 5 lives. "We have a long walk ahead of us," I said, helping Kaya from the boat, "and we need to warn others. No one should come to this place." Kaya nodded, her face resolute, despite the exhaustion and grief etched into her features. The stories were true, all of them, and we need to make sure they're not forgotten. Together, the 3 of us turned our backs on Whispering Pines and began the long trek through the wilderness, carrying with us a warning as old as the land itself. Some places belong to forces we cannot understand, and some legends exist for a reason. Behind us, as darkness fell completely, a single howl rose from the forest, a reminder that the skinwalkers remained, guardians of their ancient territory, waiting for the next unwary travelers to cross their path. But not us. We had survived to tell the tale, and in the telling, perhaps others would be spared our fate.